We'll begin with a roll call.
Mayor Hattasol,
Here.
Commissioner Reddy,
Present.
Commissioner Butler,
Here.
Commissioner Mata,
Here.
Commissioner Morse.
Present.
We have a quorum.
All right, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. We've got three work session agenda items. Commissioners, would you like to make a motion about allowing for public comment?
I move we have public comment. Second.
It's been moved and seconded to allow public comment on the work session items. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Reddy,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Mata,
Yes.
Commissioner Morse,
Yes.
Mayor Hattasol.
Yep.
Motion passes.
All right, we'll move to the first item, which is the Convention and Visitors Bureau First Quarter Report. Okay, come on up. Introduce yourself and
My name is Kevin Roberts. I serve as chair of the CBB Steering Committee. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. My task is to come up and introduce our presentation and to thank our committee members and recognize them for serving on the steering committee. They're all community members, and many have their own businesses and spend a lot of time with the steering committee. We do have a new member that will be joining us with the director of Manhattan Parks and Rec being placed. Aaron Stewart will be joining our committee at our next meeting on June 7th. So if he doesn't know that yet, he does now. So we look forward to welcoming him to serve on the committee. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to CVB staff, and Jen Alley is up first.
You're going to throw me to the wolves. Good evening. My name is Jen Alley. I'm the convention sales manager for Visit Manhattan. The next one here, Visit Manhattan contracts with Tourism Economics to market research. This analysis utilizes the following data sources: DK Shiflet, survey data including spending and visitors totals for domestic visitors to Kansas, Bureau of Economic Analysis and Bureau of Labor Statistics, employment and wage data by industry, STAR lodging performance data, including room demand, room rates, occupancy, and room revenue for hotels, and tax collect. This report came out February of this year for research analysis from 2021 data. $157 million in direct visitor spending with over 2,000 jobs, and $18.6 million in taxes collected for Manhattan. This first slide shows the year to date for the STAR for the quarter one compared to the same time frame the previous 4 years. We've increased in all items year over year. I also like to note that 2019 was the last quote-unquote normal year that we had due to COVID, and then the years after where it was kind of in recovery. And so when I'm looking at comparisons, I like to look to see where we are compared to 2019. In 2023, exceeded those numbers in the first quarter in all aspects. After the first quarter, occupancy, was at 63.5%. ADR is nearly $108. RevPAR is at $68.54 with a total revenue of $7.9 million for the quarter. This one is showing the first quarter by their end of month numbers. So again, we're seeing increases month to month. January finished at 56.6% with a RevPAR of $58.76. February increased a bit to 63.1% occupancy with a RevPAR of $67.90. And March finished the quarter strong with a monthly occupancy of 70.7% and a RevPAR of nearly $79. So again, we saw increases across the board as quarter one progressed. This is showing the weekly figures from the last full month of the first quarter. Again, it's showing increases week over week from the previous year. I know that you all received the previous packets for the previous months with that weekly information, but I just wanted to note that every single week so far in 2023 has seen an increase over last year. There was not a single week so far in the first 3 months where we were down compared to a year ago, which is a positive thing. I also want to note that this 5th week of March, the weekly occupancy for the city was 76.3%, which was the highest week of the year so far. I looked back to see what we had specifically going on, what we knew of. K-State hosted a national conference that week called the Bash. It was, hosted by the landscape architecture students. That was about 3 or 4 days that week that they had people staying at multiple hotels for that conference that was held on campus. That week, we also hosted the Kansas Governor's Public Health Conference that week, and that was again 3 or 4 days. And then the week ended with K-State Open House, which was that weekend. This is showing where our team is in 2023 compared to the annual totals of the previous 4 years. This is for all markets, so it's any of our meetings and conferences plus any sports events that are included in these figures. I want to point out that this is for booking, so this is what we have on the booked so far in the first quarter for events in the future. Many of the things that I've personally been working on as far as meetings and conventions is for late 2023, 2024, and then I'm also working on a couple of things for 25 and 26, so I'm trying to work 2 to almost 4 years out. And I'm also, so far this year, we've booked 70 events. Those events are yielding an estimated 5,000 room nights and about $3.6 million in estimated economic impact. Specifically for meetings held the first quarter, this is showing the number of meetings held with a comparison of what we were in past years at this time. We ended the quarter with 34 meetings, yielding just over 6,000 room nights and nearly $3 million in estimated economic impact. Some notable events that I wanted to mention, we started the year out hosting the first Kansas Agritourism Summit. That was held the first week of January. We had 2 conferences in the quarter with the Kansas Bankers Association. K-State was able to host the Big 12 Conference on Black Student Government, and they estimated about 700 attendees that stayed in the hotels during that weekend, and they had their event on campus at the Union. And then, of course, we ended the quarter with the previously mentioned Kansas Governor's Public Health Conference that last week of March. The last thing that I'm going to go over is our first quarter meetings booked. It's showing that what we booked in the first 3 months of the year, again, this is looking into the future. This is meetings only. This figure does not include any of the sports stuff that Marcia will cover. This is showing that we've booked 47 meetings total, yielding just under 6,000 room nights and over $2.7 million in estimated economic impact. Again, just a couple of things that I wanted to note. We were able to included in this figure was a couple of brand new things that have not met in Manhattan before. This quarter, we secured the Kansas Pharmacists Association for their annual conference and expo that will be held in August of 2024. And another group that we were able to bring in was the Natural Areas Association. This is a national association. They'd never been to Kansas before. And we had the pleasure of hosting 2 of their clients. They flew in from the East Coast for a couple of days. They got to go to the Discovery Center. They spent an afternoon at the Kanza. The next week, they got back home and asked us for a contract. So they will be coming also in 2024. So we were excited about that piece because it was something that had never been here before. Does anybody have any questions before I turn over?
Yeah, I do. On your total room nights and your attendees, in 2019, and between 2019 and 23, they look like they're flipped. Like the attendees is at 5,000, and then in 2023 it's at 3,000, but rooms were 2,500 and attendees were 5,900, and then in the economic impact, it doesn't show. I guess I expected it to be more of an economic impact if we had more rooms.
Right, right. So we noticed that too. And so I did some digging in, we both did over the course of the last couple weeks. And what's kind of weird is the formula that goes into the estimated economic impact is not necessarily based on room nights, it's based on people. And so what we found is through the turnover of different people from 2018, 19, how many, 4 different people in my spot, people kind of entered things differently. So one thing that I'm trying to do is make sure that things are a little bit more consistent in getting the right information from the clients when they call in. We put this information in so that you don't see that disparage.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, because it doesn't make sense.
Right, I'm with you.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Jen, I was glad to hear you include some conferences at K-State
Yeah.
in your report. It used to be that the chamber just reported the chamber, and because I really want to know the whole for our community and
Yep.
what we attract and how many people total. So I think it's important to work with K-State on their numbers and
Absolutely.
and I want to hear all the numbers.
Yep, they're one of our greatest clients, and so one of the things
Sure.
we're trying to do is make sure that they know that we're here.
Yep.
Because we don't always find out about
know.
the things that are happening, and so trying to get in front of each of those offices and those meeting planners on campus so that we can provide as much service as we can.
Yeah.
Yep,
Good.
thank you. Good? All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name's Marcia Roselle. I'm the Sports and Leisure Sales Manager. So I'm going to talk to you about all things sports. We're similar to the convention data in that sports continues to excel in all areas since 2019. The first quarter, we saw several new sporting events, including the Kansas Special Olympics basketball and cheerleading tournament and an off-road adventure race that brought in a total estimated economic impact of over $600,000 due to those sports events. We've booked 23 future sporting events with over $800,000 economic dollars that'll be coming in. Keep in mind that these events are for the future. Obviously, in 2021, I had a banner quarter in booking, which was most likely me catching up from the 2020 year. The bottom line is sports events are still happening and will happen in the future. And one of the new exciting ones that's coming to town will be on June 16, 17, and 18. It's called Dock Dogs. If you've never seen it, it will be a festival that's held down at Blue Earth Plaza. And so it'll bring in probably close to 50 contestants with a number of four-legged athletes to compete in that event. So put a note on your calendar and come down and see it. One of our annual large events is 2A state basketball, and this year we had almost 10,000 fans come through the gates. The reason for 19 being 0 was that was when we had a scheduling conflict with K-State men's basketball, and we could not host. And so, unfortunately, I'm going to announce to you tonight that we're not going to be able to host in 2024 for those same reasons. But I have had great conversations with K-State Athletics, and they assure me that they will be willing to host again in 2025. Let's see. These are just a few pictures that highlights the great crowds that we had at 2A State Basketball. I want to thank Ron Fear and Jason Hilders for coming and helping me on the court. You can see in some of those photos that we get the whole community that comes out when it's the 2A class of 2A State Basketball. I also wanted to acknowledge that down there in the corner you see a video screen. We had a team that came that did live streaming with NFHS, and it was amazing what that crew went out and filmed in Manhattan and then broadcasted all over the state of Kansas and actually the United States, because a lot of grandparents and parents that couldn't be at the games would watch these live streaming, and so they got to know about the Little Apple from basketball. One of my favorite events was the Kansas State Special Olympics that we hosted. It was the basketball and cheerleading tournament. There was well over 750 athletes and their fans, and so we saw an increase in occupancy during that tournament. These are just a few of the fun photos that we had. This was a great partnership, Parks and Rec, USD 383, and Visit Manhattan. And so I very much appreciate all the many volunteers who came out and gave of their time. And so I also want to thank you, Mayor and Ms. Reddy, for coming that day to see firsthand what it was like to host these in our gyms. This is our social media ads. And I'm sorry, my notes have run out, so I'm going to be winging it here. This is our social media ads. You can see, I think when we sent this link to you, you were able to click on all 4 of those links to be able to see what the videos encompassed. But you can see we had 1.3 million impressions and over 140,000 clicks. This is our comparisons from all of our channels of social media. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube. And you can see there those numbers as they compare from 2022 to 2023. This is when we do organic social media content versus paid social media advertising. And so there is a difference there with those comparisons. A lot of times it depends on the time of day that it's posted, number of people that are following, all of those things. So, but we're pleased with our social media, and I want to give a shout out to Dina Huff and Kara Way that's in our office doing our communications. They just do a stellar job. The Treat 'em Right is an online hospitality training program that we initiated and launched in October of last year. We're very pleased that we had over 244 individuals who have completed the training course. We do draw a monthly winner and award them entrance into our attractions. It's a great way for those people to see what they are talking about when they talk to a visitor at their front line. These are our winners. The first quarter from the zoo there, she won a $50 Little Apple dollars. And then from Community First Bank, Sarah won a $100 Visa gift card that she assured us that she would spend locally. We're very pleased with the 47 businesses that use this training. They actually use it as their frontline training, and it's required when they start the frontline staff. So we're very pleased with it, and we'll continue to promote it. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jason Smith. Yes, they're on there. Yep, and there's one right there.
Good evening, Commissioners. Jason Smith, President and CEO of the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce. First of all, just Marcia and Jen have just done an outstanding job. I can't say enough for the work they've done, and not only in the interim since Karen's been gone, but even when Karen was here, and we're so lucky to have both of them, and I think you see tonight the results of their hard work over the last several months, and so just want to make sure we give them a shout out. You all have a copy of the annual report. That's the Chamber's annual report, which the CVB is part of, along with the other organizations that are part of the Chamber, and so we just want to make sure that you all had a copy of that. We distributed at our annual meeting in February, and this is the first time we've been here officially since that. So I do want to talk a little bit tonight about a project we undertook over the last 6 or 7 months. So when Karen announced her retirement, as you all know, we've had 2 CVB directors in 44 years. Karen had been the CVB director for about 20. And sometimes when you have one person, you tend to continue to do things because that's the way you've always done it. And even though I know Karen's not that way, I thought it'd be a great opportunity and asked her to lead the effort to get our leadership together, get the community engaged, and make sure that from a tourism standpoint at 30,000-foot level, that we're continuing to do the things that are expected from our investors and from the community at large. And so we engaged Berkeley Young, who is a consultant, national consultant. He does strategic plans for communities across the country. And this is a little different than some of the ones you've seen previously. This is not super specific, and that's on purpose. It's more giving sort of a big picture so that the new director, when they come in, can hit the ground running and kind of know what the community expectations are, know what the organizational expectations are, and then begin developing the marketing plan that goes along with that, which you all see every year as part of the contract. I'm not going to go line by line through this because you all have the opportunity to read it, but a couple things that I want to point out is as we talk to our leadership, CVB, steering committee, the board, some of you, the community, there was some discussion about from a CVB standpoint what we wanted to be, and there are some CVBs or visit organizations, destination organizations that are moving more into development of facilities or workforce development or things that are peripheral to what we've always considered the core mission of the CVB, which is attracting people and putting heads in beds. So we had that dialogue with a number of different groups, and Berkeley did a good job leading that, and some of you participated in that. And it was clear that from our leadership, particularly from the hotel leadership, that they still want the CVB focused on the heads in beds. So they want, how do we get people here, staying the night, spending money, and increasing the amount of tourists that we have every year. And so a lot of this will be very specific to that mission. And so I think it's important that we verified that with our leadership, and it's important that we all understand that going forward. The other thing that was interesting that they noted, and it's in the document that you all received separate from the PowerPoint, but there was a trend for a while to move CVBs to separate CVBs from chambers and economic development organizations and cities and make them stand alone. And Berkeley said the trend now is to move those back together because they see synergies between those entities being together, and he complimented Manhattan for being a community that has the foresight to do that. And so you can read that in there, but I thought that was at least something that helped validate how we do things here. And I think we do get a lot of synergies and savings by having all these entities together. So in terms of strategic plan, we kept the same vision and mission, and they broke the strategic objectives into 4 areas. I'll touch briefly on each one. First, in terms of the marketing and media relations, I think the item here I want to point out, as I discussed a minute ago, a lot of what we do specifically is in our annual marketing plan. Our annual business plan is how it's addressed in the contract. That's part of the contract we have with you all every year. So the strategic plan won't circumvent the marketing plan or business plan. It informs the business plan. And so this will be the document that the new director, along with the staff, can use to develop that plan that they bring to you all in December. On the group business development, a couple things I think worth noting. Item number 2, I think their recommendation is more connectivity between the Visit Manhattan staff and industry representatives in the community, as well as university representatives in the community, which Commissioner Morse mentioned a minute ago. And how can we leverage what's going on at the university, at MBAF, with some of our industry? I know healthcare, we've had some of our healthcare leadership who've really started engaging with us and saying, we really want to try to get more healthcare meetings in Manhattan because they use it for talent recruitment. They see it as a great opportunity for them to recruit people. So how can we be more responsive and collaborative with industry and university? The other item I want to point out, and again, I apologize, I'm fighting some allergies tonight, but number 3 is they're recommending a competitive sports assessment. And I think that's in light of the fact that we've had so many new sports facilities that have been constructed or are planning to be constructed. And so what specifically are the areas that we can go after to maximize, and I've heard Commissioner Reddy mention it many times, how do we maximize the facilities to get some payback in terms of what the taxpayer investments have been in those facilities? On this slide, I think one of the items I wanted to point out, and this was the discussion, and this was more of an internal discussion, but it was one that was facilitated from a few years ago when Country Stampede left and went to Topeka, and there was some discussion about how do we replace Country Stampede. And the reason, I think you all know this, we've had this, I hate to bring up bad news again, right? But it's something I think it's important that people know we haven't just forgotten it, and that we continue to look at those options. The reason Country Stampede moved, number one, it was an ownership change, and that was part of the ownership was Topeka. But number two, they had enormous expenses before they even started hiring talent in terms of leasing the state park, getting the stage, getting all the chairs, getting everything in place. And Topeka had a facility that was ready-made. They didn't have to incur those expenses. So, and don't quote me on this, but I've been told it was as much as maybe $500,000 before you even start hiring talent. Well, that gets really hard to try to attract something that major to replace it. And so if we're going to do something like that, we probably are going to need to think about permanent facilities if that's what we want to do. Now, one of the things that Berkeley talked about is you have 7 major festivals a year at K-State, right? I mean, we have these major football games that 50,000 people come, and I guess some of them are from Manhattan, but 50,000 people are in the community, and then basketball and baseball. So you have major festivals. You just don't call them that. You call them something else. And so it could be possible that as you look at that and evaluate facilities, that you determine the investment in something like that, the return, either from a prioritization standpoint, it doesn't make sense, or the return maybe wouldn't make sense right away. I still think it's something we have to continue to think about and something we have to look at. I think there are existing events that we can continue to promote and grow and hopefully see those get larger. You see things like potentially the new ag event facility that the KSU Foundation is building in the North Campus Corridor Edge Collaboration District that presents some new opportunities. And so, but I want to point that out because that was a specific dialogue with Berkeley about, there's a lot of people who talk about sometimes replacing Stampede, and it's not about just recruiting a new festival. We would have to make major investments to make something like that happen in the future. Next slide talks a lot about the hospitality industry workforce. This is where I think one of the things that Berkeley talked about earlier in terms of the synergy from a chamber, CVB, economic development all being together is there's some items that are really important for tourism that if we are going to ask our tourism organization to focus only on attracting people, attracting visitors, meetings, sporting events, they don't have the time to undertake. And some of them are things like workforce development, which we do with the economic development and the chamber. And so there are things that the tourism folks can inform the chamber, and we can include them into that dialogue, into some of the things we're doing there. But they do recommend, and the second from the bottom, in continuing our Treat 'em Right hospitality program. They were really impressed that we had implemented that there, and Marcia talked about that. And that it's really important to keep your frontline workers informed about what's going on in the community so that they can be good advocates and ambassadors to visitors coming in the community. The other thing I want to mention, and I know you hear about this all the time, but even when you talk about attracting hospitality workers, housing, childcare, transportation, all very important. And so that's why we've supported things like housing and some of the initiatives there. That's why we are working on childcare, which some of you may be aware of our some of the things that we're working on in that realm for our state grant application. So last item I want to point out is one of the things, and it is something I've seen in other communities that they've used very successfully, and it's probably something we should have done sooner, but they are recommending having some kind of annual recognition event for people who are active and engaged in the tourism industry. We do that in the chamber, we do that in economic development, we should be doing that in tourism as well. And so we'll task the new director to put something in place that does that, as well as a separate annual report, which, as you all have an annual report that's part of the chamber, but we do a separate economic development report that we partner with the city and Kansas State on, and so we should probably have a separate annual report that we can distribute on the impacts and benefits of tourism. And so I think that's a good strategy as well. The last thing I have, because I think I want to make sure that I keep you all updated, and we are, Commissioner Reddy and Ron both have participated with us in this process, but we continue to interview for the CVB director job. We did have a first round of candidates. None of those worked out, and so we are on a second round of candidates. We are very optimistic that we are going to find, we're not going to find anybody like Karen, but we are very optimistic that we are going to find someone that Manhattan can be proud of and will do a great job for our community. And hopefully we'll have that done by the end of May. So if not, I will make sure I send an update through Ron so that you all know where we are in that process. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sure the rest of our team is happy to answer any questions as well.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I think this is really good that you have a strategic plan and more of the collaboration piece between the university, the chamber, and this. It would be good to also have the military liaison component added to it as well, so it'd be a complete package, since they're
Good
all
point.
housed under the
Yeah,
chamber.
great point.
I think we're done here.
Mayor,
All right.
if I could
Wait,
just
wait,
share
hold on.
some news. We received our second quarter revenue statement from the state of Kansas, and it was up considerably. You might recall that our first quarter in January, which reflects, I think, October, November, December of '22, was almost 845,000, which was 200,000 above '22's. Same comparison, this check was going to be just short of 650,000, which is another 229,000 higher. So that's a great trend. It blows 2019 data out of the water. So with just half of our payments for the year, we're up 428,000. And so the other thing that we were able to come up with is an estimate about how much of that revenue is from short-term rentals. And we got calculated about $41,000, or about 7%, is due to short-term rentals. So it is a significant component, and look forward to, we'll get another one in July, and then another one at the end of the year.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of factors that go into that, and thanks, Ron, for presenting that. But I do want to make sure that I recognize Marcia and Jen again for all their hard work, because they work really hard. And Jen being on now is really, you heard talk about new things we're getting, and she's just came from out of the hotel industry, and she's just hit the ground running and done a great job. And of course, Marcia's done a great job for years, so appreciate both of them.
Yeah, I really do appreciate all the data points to the trend lines. And that gives us more of a idea of, because we're always asking how is the money being spent? And this kind of gives us a little more data, the better, and this kind of encompasses the trajectory there.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Any public comment on the Chamber's presentation? Okay, we'll move on to the Americans with Disability Act Self-Evaluation and Transition Plan Update.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. Maybe. There we go. All right. Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. We're giving you a little update. We're kind of near the halfway point, maybe closer to the end of our ADA self-evaluation, and we're developing the transition plan. So we wanted to provide a status update with you all. I don't have much today other than to introduce our consultants who are going to lead this conversation. Aaron Urich with Kimley Horn and Christy Avalos with Accessology, who have been helping with a lot of the evaluations. They've also been leading our staff technical committee meetings, as well as our Community ADA Advisory Group, which just had a meeting here at 4 p.m. in the City Commission room today. So a lot of work and evaluation that's gone into it and more work to come, but we'll let them take it away.
Hi, Erin Urick with Kimley Horn.
And Christy Avalos with Accessology.
Nice to see you all again. We've made a lot of progress since the last time we spoke with you all, so looking forward to providing some updates. So agenda for today, we did want to remind everyone of the importance of this project and talk about what the updates what updates have occurred during this project so far. But we do want to give you some examples of some of our observations, both on the program services and activities side as well as the facility side. And then, as Jared just alluded to, we've had a public outreach effort, and so we did want to share what we are doing for that. So the importance of the ADA self-evaluation and transition plan. This is some of the information we talked about a year ago when we were getting this project kicked off. So I just wanted to remind everyone that it is required by the federal law, the Title II of the ADA, and failure to comply with the ADA can result in withholding of federal and state fundings, or federal and state funds, and settlement agreements with the Department of Justice, and then also private lawsuits. So lack of accessibility directly impacts the lives of Manhattan residents and visitors. And over the past couple meetings that we've had with our ADA advisory group, we've heard so many stories and great feedback from them, but that really just hits this point home with the feedback that we have been receiving. And then also the KDOT and DOJ review that it was supposed to be occurring this spring. They were going to be checking in to make sure that the city was progressing in their ADA transition plan update. And to recap the city efforts to date that we discussed previously at the start of this project, just to let everyone know that the city has been making progress towards ADA accessibility since as early as 1992. There was a comprehensive review of all the policies, practices that were used in providing program services and activities. But as we discussed previously, a lot of that has changed since then. So that needed to be updated. And then there was also select buildings and parks that were evaluated. So in the selection of the buildings and parks that we looked at during this particular phase, we made sure to look at those that had not been evaluated to date. And then with the public rights-of-way, there was some conversations that had happened about what needed to be done with the public rights-of-way. Quantities were identified, but no evaluations had previously been completed. And since that 1992-1995 update, development of the self-evaluation and transition plan, there hadn't been a good living document that had been updated on a regular basis so that these updates could be documented. And so with what we did over the latter part of last year and the first part of this year, I wanted to remind everyone of what the Title II requirements are and where we stand on that with relationship to this phase. So with the administrative requirements that are on this slide, providing notice to the public about the ADA, designating an employee to oversee Title II compliance, and adopting and publishing a Title II grievance procedure. We did review the city's notice and the grievance procedure, and those are posted online. And we do have the ADA coordinator, Robin Dreyer, who oversees the Title II compliance. So we did want to make everyone aware that she is the ADA coordinator if you were unaware. And then looking at other Title II requirements that are really digging into some of these evaluations that we had a need to look at, it's evaluating the current services, policies, and practices. So I mentioned they were previously looked at in the 1992-1995 timeframe, and so we have started looking at the current ones during this particular phase. There are still more left to be done, and we'll talk about which ones were reviewed and which ones still are left to be completed. And then once those are reviewed, any observations that we make as part of that, the city will need to make modifications to all of those services, policies, and practices to bring them into compliance. We are working, like I said, with the public outreach efforts to provide an opportunity for people to comment on the self-evaluation process. And then once this is completed for those programs, services, and activities, just making sure that this is kept on file for at least 3 years after the completion. And then looking on the facilities side of things, making sure that all of the city's services, programs, and activities are readily accessible and usable by individuals with disabilities also is going to be an ongoing process. It's not a one-time thing. So as different program services come online, it's going to be something that the city needs to make sure that they're looking at to make sure it's accessible to all users. And then the bigger part of this is developing and also maintaining the transition plan. So that's going to be identifying all those barriers to access that we're going to talk about today, but then also making sure that that document gets used as a long-range planning document, just like you would any of your other master plans. This is simply your accessibility master plan. And then with that transition plan development, similar to the self-evaluation requirement, there is that obligation to have public outreach. And then lastly, the schedule for providing curb ramps, that will also be included in the transition plan. So an overview of the tasks that we completed, we did establish the internal ADA liaison committee with city staff, and we have been updating them regularly on the progress that we've made during this project so far. We reviewed select program services and activities, as well as select facilities, the public outreach effort, and then we have our staff training that's upcoming. All those items that I just talked about regarding the ADA transition plan and their requirements from Title II, we are hitting on all the requirements that we just discussed. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christy to talk about some of our observations from the program services and activities reviews.
Good evening. Okay, so the way that we evaluate your program services and activities is we start by looking at your website. If we can find it, then the public can find it. So we do online information gathering through your website, and then we try to figure out from what we've gathered, what questions do we still have? What do we need to know? And we develop that into a survey that goes to the individual departments or the department representatives. Then once they have responded to the survey, we go through that and we figure out what else we need to know. A lot of times the answers that we get will bring up additional questions. So it's like peeling back the layers of an onion to get to the core. And those follow-up meetings were scheduled to be done over the phone. And so that's kind of the three-step process that we go through. With the departmental surveys, we went to each one of these departments: airport, city manager's office, the finance office, human resources, legal services, which was specific to the municipal court, fire services, Parks and Rec, and with Parks and Rec, we focused mainly on the Discovery Center and the zoo. We found certain things that were common, like there's no consistent citywide non-discrimination policy. One department would have one, another department would have something else, and there's nothing that's citywide that is consistent. We also found that most of the departments don't know how to get information in alternate formats. If somebody said, hey, I'd like to have this in Braille, or large print, there's no consistent policy or practice that helps make that happen. The same with auxiliary aids. If they need to have an assistive listening system or something, there isn't a standardized policy or practice that helps make that happen. We also found that the department liaisons were unaware of any ADA training that has come through. And most said that they would like to receive it. We also found non-consistent citywide policies for ensuring captioning on videos, anything that's on your social media, anything that is on your website, anything that you present in terms of training for onboarding or anything like that, all has to have closed captioning. And we found that there was inconsistencies in that. The public outreach efforts generally did not have specifically included groups of people with disabilities. So there were a couple of projects that we saw where there was outreach to the public, but no specific outreach to the local disability organizations to get their input. And then when checklists are used for special events and things like that, we did not find any ADA-related questions to make sure that the venue or that the facility was going to be fully accessible for the event. Now, we looked at 4 buildings, 11 parks, 10.3 miles of paved trails, 15 signalized intersections, 25 miles of sidewalk, as well as 225 unsignalized intersections. So that was the scope for this particular project. I'm focusing on the buildings right now, and these are the 4 buildings that we looked at. The Firehouse number 5, Firehouse number 3, Municipal Court, and the parking garage. Most of the common issues dealt with path of travel, specifically from your accessible parking to an accessible entrance. That's kind of the main focus. It doesn't do any good to have accessible restrooms if they can't get in the front door. And so that's the main focus, but also to getting like from the public sidewalks into the building. So when we're looking at the exterior path of travel, we found level changes of various heights. Slopes that were non-compliant or cross slopes that were non-compliant, and gaps in the sidewalk that could catch the front wheel of a wheelchair and flip somebody, or even the front of a walker. When it came to restrooms, we found clear floor space was not provided for some of the toilets. We found non-compliant stall doors or handles. We found non-compliant water fountains. Wherever you have one, you have to have 2. One for people in wheelchairs or people of short stature, and then one for people who have trouble bending or stooping. And so we always have to have a high and a low, and we found a lot of times that either they had one or the other, but not both. And then parking signage, a lot of times the signage wasn't where it was supposed to be, or it wasn't as high as it was supposed to be. It's supposed to be 60 inches minimum to the bottommost character. So just to give you some examples, Municipal Court, we see some cracks and deterioration that exceeded a 1/2 inch, which is our marker, a 1/2 inch. Firehouse number 3, the lavatory is too close to the wall, which obstructs the clear floor space, makes it difficult to utilize the grab bar. In the Municipal Court, we have a drinking fountain that is, the way that it is set up is a protruding object, and they only had the lower one. They didn't have a higher one for people who have trouble bending or stooping. These are the parks that we evaluated. There were 11 of them as part of this project. And the most common issues were very similar to the facilities. Your parking and your signage location and slopes and surface types and things like that. Path of travel was in some cases loose material, which is not allowed in an accessible route, or had uneven or cracked concrete. Restroom, again, clear floor space, and lavatory pipes not being wrapped, things like that. And then missing some of the drinking fountains. So another few examples. We had at the skate park, van accessible stall had all kinds of problems. There was no van accessible. There was one car space, no van space. Loose material, the striping was gone, the sign was too low. At Northview Park, there was no accessible route to get to the sandbox. At parks, there needs to be an accessible route to every amenity that's offered. And then at City Park, Arts and Humanities, the urinal obstructs the clear floor space for the toilet. And then when it came to the trails, we did all 10 trails that are listed. Most common issues there either dealt with running slope or cross slope. Once the running slope hits 5%, by definition, it's a ramp. We then have to treat it like a ramp and have handrails on both sides and that kind of thing. The cross slope's never supposed to be more than 2%. That's a liability issue for the city because if the cross slope is too much, a lot of people in wheelchairs don't have balance. They don't have front to back. They don't have side to side. They can tip over and get injured. And so we are also looking at elevation changes, or we found a lot of elevation changes. You're allowed to have 1/4 of an inch absolute, and then it can go between 1/4 and 1/2 an inch with a bevel, and nothing above 1/2 an inch is allowed. And then there are overhead obstructions, which are generally speaking just going to be a maintenance issue, and I'll show you some examples here. So the linear trail on the left, the cross slope is at 4.6%, more than double the allowable cross slope of 2%. At McCall multi-use path, you can see the tree limbs are going right over the sidewalk. So if somebody were visually impaired, whether they use a cane or a dog, they would smack right into those branches. And so that's a maintenance issue that needs to be developed into a policy that trees that grow over a sidewalk have to be maintained so that they're at least 80 inches high, so that there's no risk of somebody getting injured on them. And then on Hudson Trail, we had the running slope that was at 7.9%, which is by definition a ramp. And so we need to do some adjustments there.
Thanks, Chrissy. Also looking at the public rights-of-way, we had some similar findings. So we did look at the entire pedestrian path of travel in the public rights-of-way. So that included sidewalks, pedestrian street crossings, pedestrian driveway crossings, and at signalized intersections, we also looked at the pedestrian signal equipment and then any associated curb ramps at those locations. So what we found with the curb ramps is that there were excessive flare cross slopes, and we'll show examples of what this looks like. Obstructions that were in the curb ramp, the turning space, or the landing at the top, or the flares, and non-compliant detectable warning surfaces. So some examples: excessive flare cross slopes, the concrete that is there at the front of the curb ramp adjacent to the grass was in excess of 10%. And this is actually a design flaw in that you don't need flares adjacent to grass. If it's a concrete surface, that's when these would be appropriate. So they're not necessary and they're out of compliance. The obstructions in the curb ramps in the middle photo, the detectable warning surfaces have started sinking down into the curb ramp, which is allowing for ponding and other sediment to be in there. It's creating a surface condition that's not firm and stable or slip resistant, and then it's also creating that obstruction with the sediment that's remaining there, in addition to the 1/4 inch elevation change. And then on the right, the non-compliant detectable warning surfaces. The detectable warning surfaces are required to have color contrast and also be installed appropriately, so the full width of the curb ramp. And so we have some color contrasting issues in this instance. For the pedestrian signal equipment, some of the common issues, for the clear space that's required to be the flat level area in front of the push button to allow for activation for someone who is trying to push the button, the clear spaces had excessive cross slopes, and then oftentimes they were out of reach range, either because there was not concrete adjacent to it or there were some challenges with where that was located. And then also having the pedestrian push button greater than 5 feet off the crosswalk. Examples of this, excuse me, the photo on the left is excessive push button reach range. It can't be more than 10 inches, and the distance from that edge of sidewalk to the push button was well over that with that grass area in between. The excessive clear space cross slope for the middle picture, because this is supposed to essentially be a flat area, no more than 2% cross slope, when it's placed on the ramp run like that, it's not allowing that surface to be flat, and someone could potentially have challenges activating the push button while also trying to maintain themselves on that curb ramp run. And then the excessive push button offset from the crosswalk, there was a requirement that the push button be located no more than 5 feet offset that crosswalk to allow for a reasonable location at the corner, so someone's not hunting for the push button if they can't see it. And so this one was further offset than 5 feet. Sidewalk corridors had a lot of the similar issues related to the path of travel that Christy mentioned for the buildings and parks. Obstructions, whether they be permanent or temporary, or utilities, and then issues structurally with the concrete, so heaving, sinking, cracking, and oftentimes those would lead to ponding issues, and then the cross slopes being greater than 2%. So some examples, the photo on the left is showing a sidewalk panel that has sunk down, now creating more than a 1/4 inch elevation change, which has allowed sediment and ponding and those temporary obstructions to come into the sidewalk. Also, if you look at those bushes on the right-hand side, similar to the trees that Christy showed, those are also obstructing the pedestrian access route, so that becomes a maintenance issue. The middle photo, there is a utility utility cover that's in the middle. It is sunken down below the grade of the sidewalk, so now you're creating, again, that 1/4 inch or more elevation change, and it's also allowing for ponding to occur in that location. And then on the right-hand side, we have a sidewalk with cracking down the middle, and even if it's not creating a vertical discontinuity, if it's greater than a 1/2 inch, it's of concern and it needs to be resolved. You can also see some of that slope issue around the sides is creating some more ponding. So as it relates to the ADA transition plan development, it's really bringing this all into, like I said, that master plan for accessibility. So during this phase and in future phases, we've identified those physical barriers to access as well as their location. We have described the methods that the city will use to bring those into compliance for the buildings and parks, the 2010 ADA standards, and for the public rights-of-way, the 2011 PROAG, or the current version that's in place at the time of construction. Schedule and for making those modifications, and this will be longer than 1 year. This is what we're currently working with staff on to figure out what that schedule looks like. And then the last one on there is the name and position of the official who's responsible for implementing the transition plan. That will be Jared Wassinger, so we have identified him to be in that role. So these are draft planning level cost estimates. We are still working with staff, specifically in the buildings and parks, to make sure that the numbers that we've used are consistent with projects that have recently occurred. So these are not final numbers, and we are going to be making sure that they are reflecting current projects before these numbers are complete. We did want to point out that we do have prioritization as part of this. And so this table is representing the high, medium, and low prioritization of each of the different facility types. And so this is another item we're working with staff on, is how are these projects implemented? Is it going to be addressing these issues on a per facility basis, so completing all the improvements at a particular building, or is it looking at all of the high priority elements as you go down the list? But one thing I did want to point out is all of these do not have to be standalone accessibility improvement projects. These all need to be looked at from a standpoint of what are the upcoming projects and have the accessibility concerns that we've found been incorporated into the scope of the project. And many of those projects you already have funding identified for. So it's going to be understanding the overlap between those upcoming projects and what these accessibility improvements or where these have been identified to make sure that they get incorporated. And then with that, if there are any other projects that need to happen, and they may be standalone accessibility improvement line items, these are the things that we're working through with staff to figure out what makes sense. And this is just an example implementation schedule, but this is something that we're working towards. So all of the different facility types don't have to be completed in the same time frame. For example, in this chart, we're showing a 10-year building implementation plan, and so that's going to be less than the public rights-of-way. We know the public rights-of-way are a big ticket item, and that's something that's going to have to be fixed over a longer period of time. This is something also that needs to be updated as more facilities are evaluated, but this is why this is so important that it get looked at annually, and that projects that come online are incorporating all these accessibility improvements so that they aren't standalone improvements. Now, with the public outreach, the ADA advisory group that was appointed, the group's purpose is to assist with the input and the public outreach for the city's ADA self-evaluation and transition plan. There's 26 members representing local disability organizations as well as interested members of the public. We've had a great couple meetings with them. We had a lot of people show up for that. And we helped them understand some of the same information that we presented to staff. As we did the kickoff meeting with them, really helped them understand the importance of this project, why the city is choosing to update their plan and help them understand the basis for the project. And then the meeting that we had today, we shared some of the similar findings or the observations that we just shared with you all. And again, there's just been a lot of great input from this group, and so it was a good decision to have that group be a part of this project. As part of that public outreach process, we have developed a public access survey, and so this is available in SurveyMonkey, and it is live right now. We just distributed the information to that ADA advisory group for them to share with their larger groups, so we can hopefully get a lot of great additional feedback. And in addition to that, we also have an online map where people can go and identify areas of concern on a map that's similar to what you would see in Google Maps. And so they can write their commentary on that, and we'll be able to export all this data so that the city can look at what the comments are. The remaining phase 1 tasks that we have are conducting staff training. That'll be happening sometime this summer. We have made recommendations based on our initial observations on where staff could benefit the most from having that training and in what areas. And then we will be incorporating all the comments from staff and from the public to finalize the transition plan. And having the commission approval in July is our goal. So with that, we'd like to receive any questions or feedback that you have so that we can continue with this process and then finalizing the transition plan.
Well, I'm really depressed now.
I'm sorry.
Because the thing is that this wasn't even the whole specter of the city. This is, if phase 1 is 20-some million dollars, then you've only done a third of the parks and a fourth of the sidewalks and 20% of the rights-of-way. So that's not your fault, I guess. But have they tightened up the regulations since 1992 or 95 to where now 2% is not okay for slants and stuff, or has it always been that way? And
It's always been that way.
And so, so like that one stretch of sidewalk, jogging, running, you called it running thinking, where it was 7%. The solution to that would be put guardrails up or put handrails up the whole length of that or something?
Possibly, but there are other options. For instance, there is a new design guideline that has been put out that it's currently a requirement for federal parks, but it's called outdoor developed areas. And it recognizes that cities don't want to put up a bunch of handrails because then we've got skateboarders, right? And so it recognizes that type of environment as being, kind of held out different than the ADA. And so if you adopt that as your potential guideline, then we can utilize that and you can enforce that.
And I would also add on in the public rights of way, that is the reason that we evaluated everything per PROAG, because there are different requirements compared to the 2010 ADA standards, for example, that in the public rights of way, your running slope can match the grade of the adjacent roadway so that you do not have to put handrails and have landing areas every so often. So that is the reason that we recommended that the city use PROAG for the public rights of way.
Yeah, the ADA standards was written for buildings. I mean, they had to start somewhere, right? So that's where they started, was buildings. And then they've done other work for things like parks and for things like public rights of way. And those guidelines that they've developed are final. They may not have been fully adopted at the federal level, but you can adopt them and they're considered a best practice.
Looking at some of your pictures, I mean, you have public right-of-ways, but then you're showing sidewalks with trees and pitting and all of that. Are those just regular sidewalks in front of homes and things of that nature? I mean, they kind of looked like that in some of the pictures.
So some of them were neighborhoods, but it's just any of the sidewalks that we evaluated, regardless of where they were, those were some of the common issues that we found at all locations.
Which is something we know about and talk about all the time, are the sidewalks. And obviously, that's the homeowner's responsibility, so are the hedges. And
So with
so
the
a lot
code
of-
services, just, they would have to enforce that part.
Thank you.
That's,
But the reality of that is totally impractical. I mean, I've walked the city a couple times, every house, and we probably got 70% of the sidewalks that have got these different cracks that don't meet the standards. And if you sent code out people think their property tax bill's high now, wait till they get a code ticket for fix your sidewalk. You know, so I don't know. So some of that, I mean, sounds good, but the practicality of it and the cost just doesn't really seem feasible, especially enforcing it citywide.
I can tell you I do expert witnessing on access-related cases all over the country, and an ordinance putting the responsibility on the homeowner doesn't hold up in court because they didn't sign anything. And there have been cases where they went, okay, if I'm responsible, they've torn out the sidewalk and then replaced it with bushes. And they said, well, you know, it's my house, that's what I want to do. And now your pedestrian network is broken, and the city had to fix that. So it really doesn't hold up in court to just put it on the homeowner. The other piece to that is they're going to run down to Home Depot and get some Quikrete and just slap it up against the cracks. It's not going to comply. So if we do something new and it doesn't comply with the standards, then that's a problem as well. So there has to be some effort on the part of the city, because ultimately you are responsible for them.
That's an interesting comment, because that's always been our position, is that's the homeowner's responsibility. And I know a lot of people spend a lot of money fixing up those sidewalks.
Yeah.
You start saying they don't have to do it, I mean, you're not gonna get any of them fixed.
And our traditional aspect with that has been complaints basis, where you have complaints about sidewalks, and you see some that have been repaired properly and some that haven't and been grinded. You know, part of the original implementation is that we know we have a lot of old infrastructure out there, and especially in the older part of town where you don't typically build new sidewalks very often. So you're going to continue to inherit that, and the only time you really do is if you have a new house that you took out an old house and you replaced it with apartment. That's when you require them to upgrade everything. So you upgrade the sidewalk then when they build the new stuff, because that new building permit requires them to replace that sidewalk. Otherwise, it's some kind of program, and I've seen cities where they'll match it, 50-50 basis. Some cities are taking over sidewalks because of this very issue, as opposed to putting it on the burden on the homeowner. But these older freeze-thaw cycles and just different things, you're always going to have heaving. I know the trail that they saw, I constructed that when it was originally built. It was built to compliance, and over time it's shifted. That area is flooded several times, and you get these freeze-thaw cycles. And so that maintenance aspect becomes more of a significant factor. But, the whole concept is that as you build or repair facilities, you'll bring it up to code and up to ADA standards. And I would say, I think generally we've done that, and we've also relied on the profession. That's when, if it's a private facility, the code enforcement has required that. Obviously, we've missed some drinking fountains where one got put in and the others, and some of the other things. A lot of the one picture I saw was just a retrofitted bathroom that was very old, and we tried to do the best we can to make it somewhat usable. And a lot of these were employee areas versus public areas. And so,
Does that make
not
a
that
difference?
it used to, but it doesn't necessarily anymore. It depends on how much renovation you're doing in that particular space. Doing something is better than doing nothing, unless you're gonna totally tear it down and start over again. But that's the challenge that we've faced, and obviously that ticket you saw for all of the right-of-way and sidewalks in towns is a big one. And it would be, I'm sure your phones would ring a lot if we started to say, you need to go replace that sidewalk.
Yeah, but
And some of it's our own street trees that
But
cause
this
rooting
plan
problems.
could though include, because we do that safe routes to schools where we're fixing sidewalks, and we've got some money dedicated in the trails. And so there is an amount, like I look at that, if you have it based out over the years, we do have a budgeted source to do what I consider to be the priority pieces, which is the kids getting to school. And so that focuses on a real high priority area. So if we include that in the plan, it should help, I think.
We have a lot of hills in towns, and that's one of the things where they indicated where that adjoining sidewalk is matching the slope of the street. And so it's not real practical even for a user to be able to construct to the guidelines and create the landings in that scenario. And we try to look at other routes that they can take. We have a lot of areas where we don't have any sidewalks. in subdivisions. So those are all part of those challenges. But it's a big goal, there's no doubt about it, and it will take time to, stuff that existed when ADA came into effect is never changed. They're still there. They've never been improved. There's old brick sidewalks that are deteriorated even more than what they were then. So unless there's something happening on that property, that's our enforcement avenue to get them to bring the adjacent sidewalk up to code. And the curb ramps we did a big chunk to try and do kind of every other route to make it accessible in each direction. And clearly, and that was before we even had the tactile stuff, when we did that. Now we have tactile, so when we do maintenance on an intersection, that we work in those ramps and warning devices to be able to do it. And those deteriorate over time. Some of them are cheaply made, don't last very long, as you can see pictures of. And they settled, and that's a challenge that you have in a temperate climate, for sure, so.
You know, on the sidewalk thing, I mean, we changed the city code, so now they're required on both sides of the street for new construction, but, you know, we've got some areas of town where there are no sidewalks. Does that make it all ADA non-compliant? Those whole
No,
areas?
sidewalks are not required by the ADA. It's simply once you have them installed, they need to be compliant.
And that's true with everything with the ADA.
Yeah, well,
The ADA
see,
isn't the law that says you have to have anything. You get to choose what kind of community you want and what you want to have in it. ADA just says if you have it, you have to have it for everybody.
Now, I would note that we did, if there was a gap in the sidewalk, we did note where that was, and assigned it a low priority, just so you are aware along the corridor where those exist.
So, do all of our codes need to be updated then? Because maybe they are, and like you said, maybe we haven't kept our streets and everything up to code because they were from previous areas, times when they were put in. But the auditory part of when you press the button and, you know, it says walk. And, yeah. Wait. So have those distances changed? Or have they been the same? Because as an able-bodied person, I don't experience the difference. But as you look at ADA compliance, they all look the same to me. But what you're saying is in the city of Manhattan, they're also very different.
So the requirements for the pedestrian push buttons come out of the manual and uniform traffic control devices, and that is incorporated by reference into PROAG. So the MUTCD has been the reference manual that the city should have been using as long as that's been in place. And so those have not changed. There are a few reach ranges that do come out of the ADA and PROAG, but those have not changed either. It's just the applicability of that to the push buttons, and it wasn't maybe specifically stated as a push button. It just has been called operable parts. So there's a chance that that was overlooked just because it was not specified as a push button.
And maybe those are some things we also need to, for our planning board and such, also need to know about these things. Because I didn't think about them as deeply as you did, even the ramp next to it. I can see how a wheelchair might go down. So I think those are extremely important issues as we look at, you know, being more compliant with some of these things. The parks, you spoke of elevation to a certain degree and non. So there are some individuals in our community that want kind of like a slope and up and down, not just flat. Is it possible to have some of our parks designated as ADA accessible more so than another park? So there is an opportunity for a variety of types of parks?
As long as
Or,
the
I mean, trails.
non-compliant route isn't serving an amenity that isn't otherwise served by an accessible route. So we have to have access to any amenity that you offer in the park.
Okay.
If the trail doesn't go anywhere in particular that they'd want to go to, it doesn't have to be, in theory, ADA compliant if it just sort of.
Yeah, so an example would be Roger Schultz Park. It's a new park, it's very hilly, has lots of areas, but you could create the parking area where people would go and a shelter, and whether there's a small play area or something like that, you can create that path, but the rest of the trails are not even hard surface, and they certainly follow the natural terrain. So we don't have to make the whole park accessible.
Well, that's where I would use the outdoor developed area guidelines,
Right.
because they recognize, 'cause people with disabilities want to do trail walking just like, and it depends on what their disability is. They can have, be missing one leg, but they're trying to exercise the rest of their body. So they need to have the same opportunity to use the trails as they're intended. It's just that the outdoor developed areas guidelines recognizes that we're not going to make the world flat. It was designed specifically for outdoor developed areas, and you can use different types of signage that says, okay, the slope ahead is going to be steep, and if somebody's not capable of doing that, the sign will tell them ahead of time that they're coming upon something that's not going to be compliant. And so there's a lot of opportunities to communicate with people that are utilizing the trail system, so that they know what's coming up ahead, and make decisions for themselves on whether or not they can traverse it.
I think that answers several of my questions. So as long as they are aware, and as long as they understand some of those, and also have something compatible to meet their needs, it would be okay to have them. Because I think the best thing about trails is the variety of
Right.
types we have. Some are very hilly, some are very bumpy, some are very flat, and you're meeting the needs of a variety of people and needs in our community. So I think that's my question, and what I heard you say is you can have a variety as long as there's something for everybody, and also have the appropriate signage to indicate to somebody what it may or may not have.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right, anybody else care to?
I just wondered about, we have quite a few trails that have the limestone shavings or
Millings.
or perhaps wood, pieces. Those are okay?
Some are and some aren't. Generally speaking, when you're using some type of a crushed stone
Yeah.
with a bonding agent, it's going to be better. But they did, in the outdoor developed areas, they took away one of the requirements. An accessible route under ADA is firm, stable, and slip resistant. In outdoor developed areas, they took out slip resistant. It needs to just be firm and stable. Okay, and the reason that they did that is because you've got fall and it's covered in wet leaves. You can't control the slip resistance. And so that's another reason that you would want to adopt something like outdoor developed areas so that you can enforce it locally. If you don't adopt it, then you can't enforce it, but it's going to save you a whole lot of money when it comes to your trails.
So we need a policy then, is what?
All right.
Okay. We had a history some years ago with disability accommodations. So are we in pretty good shape now, Ron? I mean, did we?
No.
Did we get a C or a D on this
Yeah.
test?
So, I mean, we were sued, and it was over accessibility
Yeah.
and curb ramps, and, that was a big part of it. But it's, again, the intent originally was that when AD was implemented, that you would do it through your codes and through construction, and that architects and engineers and everybody, as they redesign things, would accommodate the new improvements. And we've done that significantly, but there are still old areas of town that have existed the same way they were back in 1992, that they are today, and haven't had much maintenance on them. And they still have, they've probably gotten worse just from all the freeze-thaw cycles. So,
Yeah, you have a continuing obligation for barrier removal.
Right.
As well as a requirement to maintain accessible routes in an accessible condition. And that's the basis for the majority of those lawsuits.
right. So that was the effort, and then the continuing effort is to continue to improvement, and typically we do that through our CIP as we do projects. And they mentioned some of the significant street
So are we going to
projects.
change anything going forward?
Well, that'll be
that-
part of this plan.
That, from what we have been doing, that
Yes.
hasn't been adequate, totally adequate anyway?
And the other thing I think we have done a decent job of is responding to individuals with disability when they've had challenges, and I have this route I'd like to travel to go to work. can you help me move that button? We've put extenders on. We've fixed some curb ramps. We've tried to make that route that they want to take more accessible. And so that doesn't necessarily mean we're compliant, but it means we're responsive.
And I think, a targeted approach like that's more practical, because to me, it's just an impossibility, the size of the city and, to just instantly try to fix it. But if it's possible to target, specific people have issues, they live in this part of town, yeah, to me, that would be a high priority and deal with that, and then you get a bigger bang for the buck. Because those numbers are just huge cost-wise.
They are, and I think some of the other things that, with technology improvements, we've relied on consultants and contractors and stuff that we contract with to, whether it's broadcasting or different aspects, our web hosting. We'd expect our host to take care of some of those things for us. And stuff we just need to work in those contracts to make sure they are making those services available in different formats and different ways that we communicate with folks. And we just need to do a better job of ensuring that that's happening. And
That's a big part of a transition plan, is looking at your policies and your contractual agreements and who's responsible for what. Because if something gets to court, it's always going to go on the city. And so if you have really strong contractual agreements and that put responsibility on a third party, that's going to help you a lot. And that's generally part of one of the phases of evaluating your policies and programs.
I remember when Jared McKee was on the commission, he took us to task for our website. At websites, and I can't tell how we've progressed because I'm not that familiar with the requirements.
Well, at least if we're responsive, the punitive damages will be less.
ADA doesn't have punitive damages.
What is the next piece? How many, so you will come again and do so many more buildings, so many more miles and so many more feet of sidewalk? Is that like you come every year, or what happened? Does our transition coordinator take over now, having worked with you? Who keeps this work going?
So our next step is to get this approved by this group in July with some of those final recommendations, final numbers. And it's going to be up to the city at that point on what your next steps are based on everything that we present to you.
Okay.
So we do have facilities and program services and activities that were not evaluated in this phase. And so that's, again, going to be up to you all if you want to continue with those evaluations. But the ADA coordinator is the person that is that public point of contact for any concerns that come in, and Jared Wassinger is the ADA transition plan implementation coordinator, so he will be leading the efforts at this time on how that gets moved forward beyond the approval of the plan.
If you remember, when we first put out the request or something, yeah, the initial amount we were going to spend was like, whoa. And so we said, scale it back to a percentage of Ron's people scaled it back to something that was more bite-sized to get started. And so, yeah, we'll have to take another bite at some point.
As a reminder, we had an initial quote for evaluation of all program services and activities and all public rights-of-way and infrastructure and buildings. And that was near about $1 million. We scaled it down to 600. And then we scaled it down to 300, and that's what this phase was a $300,000 essentially evaluation. So not only is there the transition plan to eliminate the barriers, there's further evaluation that needs to occur. When you see these reports, you'll see the detail that goes into the evaluation and the benefit that we have of having these consultants and their expertise detailing not only the evaluation, what the barrier is, how to fix the barrier, potential costs so we can plan out for it. It'll be important for us to continue to do future phases in some capacity.
I can't imagine that every city across the United States is having to do this kind of thing to collect their CDBG funds and FAA money and all that stuff like that. it seems
I bet they are.
tyrannical of sorts almost. But not your fault. You're just here to help. I understand. So thank you for that
Did
presentation.
we, have we not had an ADA coordinator? Did we let that drop? or-
No, we've always had one.
Robin Dreyer in the Human Resources Department has always been our
Has
ADA
always been.
coordinator, and you know, you see the notice at the bottom of the city commission agenda that they can call HR. That's Robin to request an accommodation.
It's
We
just-
need to publicize that more internally and externally
Do we
across
need
our
to
programs.
empower her more? What do we need to do to make
Well,
better
like Ron
progress?
was saying, I think a lot of it has been, if there's been a complaint, we've tried to solve it.
So
It
we
hasn't been a
handle it.
big proactive, go out and find problems ahead of time,
It's like our inspections, it's on a complaint basis, and
more or less, kind of, I think.
And I think the other aspect is just, as we onboard and train people, they know Robin can help solve their problem, and she's a resource for them if they need communication equipment, or they need policy interpretation, all of those things.
we need
We just
policies.
need to adopt and train,
I think.
and retrain, and continue training.
Yeah, I think one of the things we heard, at least from other studies, is that our demographic is growing in the senior citizen demographics area. Not that they're the only ones who utilize these types of facilities or code improvements, but when you say hard of hearing and they don't have closed captioning, they're probably the only few that watch our meetings. You know, I don't, or at least they can't read it, of course, and that's probably one of the reasons to have something like that. Wheelchairs, all of these things, they may or may not call because they may also not know that there is a solution on the other end. They just adapt, and that means they use fewer facilities. When we talk that, they were a primary component for why we have walking tracks in our rec centers, because they needed a place to walk. And I think, I hope there's some of the folks that are on your committee, because they're the ones who'll give you the most feedback of whether it's, you know, some might have electric wheelchairs, some might not, some might have crutches, some might not.
Yeah.
But they definitely, especially the ones that live at home, want more access and be able to use our community services better. So I appreciate their feedback and looking at these a little closer and doing what we can, and maybe we just be a little bit more proactive as opposed to being responsive to some of these things. And I think we usually try. I think we usually try to do our best in most incidences wherever we can, and grow with the process.
And most cities do. The plan helps you know where it's the worst, where to spend your money first. You know, the plan gives you something to kind of shoot for.
Okay, well, we're
All right.
looking forward to knowing those priorities.
There you go. All right, well, thank you, Aaron and
Thank
Christine.
you.
Thank you very much.
Is there any public comment on this? Is that your thing, Kirk? Nope, not yet. Okay, all right, we'll move on to item 3. Review and discuss the ordinances, resolutions that established the various boards and the bylaws for the Airport Advisory Board, Code Appeals Board, and Housing Appeals Board. Jared.
I'm back. All right. Gosh. Try this again. Okay, continued board and committee review. We have 3 boards we're reviewing tonight. Not a lot of really substantial changes that we're proposing for these ones, so mainly just a little bit of conversation with you all so we can get these boards in front of you and provide you some feedback, and then let you know of some, I would say, more clerical or administrative tweaks that we want to make for some of these boards. But we're going to talk about the Airport Advisory Board. Brandon Keys, our airport director, met with them back in February, I believe, to kind of have this initial discussion with them. We have not necessarily met with the Code Appeals Board and the Housing Appeals Board because they meet on an as-needed basis, usually a couple times a year. And in discussions with city staff, there's not a lot of substantial changes that we're looking to recommend. Just want to bring back up the Circle of Life chart that Mayor Hassall loves so much, as a reminder that the city, and for those who are watching, that the City Commission not only appoints our city manager, but creates and appoints members of our advisory board. and they work directly with the city commission, or they work directly with city staff, staff liaisons, through the city manager, through you all, to further refine purposes and make recommendations on policies. So the Airport Advisory Board was created quite a while ago. It's in Chapter 7 of our Code of Ordinances, the aviation chapter. Not a lot has changed related to the makeup, so there hasn't really been any amendments to this ordinance in quite some time. 11 members, one of our bigger boards. We have two members that are required to be active pilots, and then 5 members, one of each, who need to be a representative as recommended from these agencies. So Fort Riley, Kansas State, the Chamber of Commerce. Actually, I believe one of the things in the ordinance is the Chamber of Commerce Transportation Committee, which I don't think exists anymore. So one of the things we'll maybe tweak when we update this ordinance, Junction City and the Potawatomi County Commission. All of them 3-year term limits, which mirrors most of our other boards, and no term limits, 3-year terms with no term limits. Currently right now they meet monthly. We had a conversation with the Airport Advisory Board about meeting quarterly, just because not a lot changes from month to month. They're usually working on a lot of big capital improvement projects that it would just benefit them to possibly meet quarterly more. And there was some feedback from the board when we talked about the membership and the requirements. Historically, there hasn't really been an issue with getting representatives from those 5 agencies. There may be a possibility that we could recommend similar language that we've used in other ordinances as it relates to boards, like a good faith effort. Like if for some reason that agency just isn't willing to provide something, you're not holding a seat vacant or no one's available. So those are really the only 2 recommendations related to kind of the makeup of the board in that conversation, meeting quarterly, and possibly looking at the members from a good faith effort standpoint, but still continuing to memorialize those 5
Jared?
agencies.
So-
Yes.
Excuse me. So is the other, if 2 active pilots and those other 5, that leaves the other 4 to just be citizens at large?
Yes,
Or-
and right now there's no requirement on those at-large members, so they could be
Anybody?
from anywhere. It'd be up to the city commission if they wanted to mirror the policy manual resolution that you all adopted related to eligibility requirements, requiring those 4 at large to live within city limits or own or operate business or property in city limits.
Yeah, it's-
There wasn't a recommendation from the board to shift that way, generally because you could have a bunch of other members who don't necessarily live within city limits, and it's a regional airport, regional draw, so that was, there wasn't any direction from the board to formalize those remaining 4.
Well, I'm glad the mayor brought that up. I think it's important to have them be from the city or within the city limits, mainly because they're basically the ones funding it. The others have a say in it, but I don't think we're getting money from Potawatomi or Junction City or even Fort Riley. They may be users of it, but as far as all the infrastructure, everything else, I think it comes from our funds.
Are you saying you'd recommend those 4 at-large positions?
Yeah, be
have a
from within the
requirement
city
that they
limits.
reside in city limits? Or
I think it, yeah.
property or business?
I want to point out,
Certainly could.
yeah, I want to point out too that we are requiring a Potawatomi County Commission appointee, but not a Riley County Commission appointee. And,
So
or
the
Gary.
history,
Well,
Let's hear the history.
Junction is good enough, but.
so the history on, when we were trying to get jet service for the airport, and expanding, those aspects, Junction City and Potawatomi County were added because we were doing regional fundraising for marketing plans and to match some of the state grants we were getting to lure the airlines. That's, I think, pretty sure Fort Riley and K-State and the Chamber have been around since a long time, but that was the primary reason for, and Junction City and Potawatomi County did contribute to some of those efforts, which were really specific towards marketing and matching some of the grant funds, but there was never been an obligation beyond that. But And we felt like they'd be ambassadors to help encourage their residents to fly out of Manhattan. So that was really the history for adding those two specific positions. And we've always been in Riley County, and I think that's why there maybe wasn't an eligibility standard that you had to be in the city, but if you're in the city, you're also a Riley County resident. So that was kind of the history on those two positions being added specifically.
Brandon, let's hear what your.
Hey, I
on it.
just wanted to share that there are 6 at-large positions and 2 have to be active pilots. But actually, the 2 active pilots just means that 2 out of the 11 members have to be pilots on the board.
So they could.
So we could have an appointment from Fort Riley that individual is an active pilot and be able to fill that, so.
Okay,
Good clarification.
So 6 at-large is the total.
okay. Well, I was gonna say, I would just take the other position that Jared kind of said. It's a regional airport, and there may be somebody from Alta Vista that, flies out or does stuff that might have a significant interest, or is a hobbyist or something that may bring a valuable viewpoint. I don't know. I don't know if, on this one, if we need to, because they're not spending any money in particular or anything like that, so.
Well, they're the ones who make recommendations for parking fees, for example, or the parking lot, and all of these.
Well,
things.
yeah, we still override them though, because that's what we do.
I just feel,
And we have to approve them.
we have, okay, then anybody can bring that to us, because it may or may not be Manhattan people, but they're making those types of decisions. I think it should be at least, because none of them have to be from Manhattan.
Yeah, but
Technically.
we'll still be the ones appointing them, so we can, if we don't like,
Yeah,
you can always vote down if you don't like who it is or something.
Or you could just say that 2 of the 11 must be city residents, just like 2 have to be pilots. And that'd be a compromise on it, because I do agree that, we market it as a regional airport, but it's funded as a municipal airport.
It's a city.
And, none of the rest of those people are ponying up for money, because I know that Rich Jankovich did his best to try to collect money from all the region, and he was not successful.
They don't even put an ad in there.
When we go back to the Airport Advisory Board in June or July, we can maybe try and get a little bit more pointed direction from them, if that's what you prefer, if they want to dive into that a little bit more.
All right, on to
Well,
the
this
next.
doesn't cost Potawatomi or Riley County Commission anything, and it is an indication that they are a stakeholder in this community effort also. So that's another way to look at it, who they represent.
One last thing I'll mention on this slide, we're seeing this in a handful of our ordinances, that they're calling out our staff liaison as an ex officio member, but they're not really serving in that non-voting ex officio capacity. So our recommendation to move forward is kind of just eliminate that language and say that you can say in the bylaws that a department will appoint a staff liaison.
Okay.
Yeah, and the key point there, I think, the reason they had ex officio is some of the committees do not want the liaison running their meetings. And that's happened in some in the past. I've gotten some feedback that define what a liaison is.
Leave that to
It's
the
not
chair.
someone that sets the agenda or runs the meeting or tells them what to do, and they're not a gatekeeper. And a couple of them wanted me to relay that as we were going through here.
Typical language that, again, we've seen in these older ordinances where we have a long list of pretty specific functions related to the board. A lot of things we talked about in other ones, these boards aren't rendering written reports. They're not negotiating major contracts. They are providing recommendations, though, that they're not preparing the annual budget. That's left to staff and the city commission and things like that. Not necessarily any short-term projects that they're actually doing related to the airport. So we've done a revision, used some of the recommended language that you all provided at some previous meetings, but having the Airport Advisory Board make recommendations to the governing body on all matters related to policies, planning, capital improvements for the Manhattan Regional Airport, and aid the city in developing community awareness of airport operations, policies, and needs. Any feedback on the,
Okay, is that it?
And,
Yep.
I'm good with that, that's fine.
and you've run it by the actual advisory board, and
Yeah, so we're gonna be taking this back to them in July with the
July.
revised ordinance, revised bylaws that they'll approve, and then that'll ultimately come back to you in the fall for final approval.
Okay.
Looks good.
Okay. Code Appeals Board, been around for a while as well. This is an interesting one, just the way, again, the Code Appeals Board and the Housing Appeals Board, from a functioning standpoint, things are going well. Their purpose, they meet on an as-needed basis to assist in certain areas related to, appeals on those matters. So I don't really have a lot of changes related to the actual, purpose and big stuff that they're doing, but there's a lot of just things that probably need to change from an ordinance standpoint. They're in Chapter 8, buildings and regulations, and then they're just called the Board of Appeals. Doesn't say Code Appeals, so the name is kind of wrong. It's kind of odd there. 9 members. This is one that gets very specific: 2 builders, 2 electricians, 2 plumbers, 2 mechanics, and a certified engineer within the city. Again, I haven't really had any issues filling those positions. There's our building official, Ryan Courtwright, has been able to recruit and get people to serve on those boards. 3-year terms with no term limits. They meet as needed. The only caveat is in the past, they have historically met on site at these locations that are having appeals. Even just putting back on your ADA hat, there can be some issues with that. And then these meetings are subject to Kansas Open Meetings Act. They need to be open and accessible to the public. Often, an appeal may be a code-related issue that would be difficult for someone who has accessibility needs, like in a wheelchair, for them to access. So we're proposing eliminating, all of our on-site meetings and having this board meet like every other board here in the City Commission. A good thing now is the technology that we have. You can have videos and pictures that can depict whatever it is that you're evaluating. So that's something that we want to work with this board and the Housing Appeals Board on. To formalize that and make that a requirement within their bylaws. They don't have any bylaws, neither does the Housing Appeals Board, so we're going to take that new policy manual resolution that you all adopted, and they'll be adopting bylaws for the first time as well. And again, their ordinance calls out the ex officio. So this is something where we would this is one where we would want to call out specifically and rename it as the Code Appeals Board within the Code of Ordinances.
What a mechanic? What kind of mechanic is it? Obviously, you're not looking like an automobile mechanic. Is it some kind of a HVAC mechanic, or any ideas what that mechanic position, what they're good at in particular, or specialize in?
It's something that's licensed through the city, so I would have to.
If it's got the apprentice journeyman title
Yeah.
to it, so I don't know if. Must be the guy with the wrench who walks around in the basement hitting certain things, who knows exactly what.
Yeah. Courtwright's not here, so I'll ask him.
See if we can just get an idea.
It's probably related to HVAC,
Yeah, no wonder.
furnaces and stuff like that, because that's not particularly called out there.
Could be.
That's what I thought.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Plumbers, electricians, that would be the only, yeah, thank you.
And they can also go visit anytime on their own, I would assume, right? Because sometimes, as commissioners, we go to a site or something and see things.
You could, depending on some of these times, it could be personal property that
Yeah.
we don't
So
have
something
access
like-
to. So
Something like that might need to be in their bylaws, is what I'm thinking. Because sometimes a video or a photograph can give you an idea, but if it's if there is a need that they need to see the entirety of a basement for space or whatever it might be, or something. I don't know. It just seems like in this specific area.
That'd be a process that's
Those would be a little.
probably coordinated through the staff liaison, and you would need to ensure that you don't have a quorum there. so
Yeah,
that you're
yeah,
not-
something like that.
And it may be you have if you know the nature of the concern, if it's an electrical, you may designate a subcommittee, well, you
Right.
wouldn't want to designate a committee, but you may have some members that could be inspectors, that can help review it on behalf of the committee and help testimony at the actual meeting then of what they saw and what they observed.
Yeah, this specific one might need some, I can understand why they would meet on site, because there's so many other variables they may need to look at.
That's a problem, because a lot of times these are down in old basements that have very poor stairways, or even somebody's converted an attic into a bedroom that's not compliant and shouldn't have been done, and so there's all kinds of access and issues as to why they shouldn't be holding a public meeting where access should be given to everyone.
The housing, both the housing and the code, well, both of these boards would have, the city has a code, and our code inspectors would have said that's not acceptable, and these owners are appealing that decision to these boards. So it's not, I think having some of the special people that we appoint to this board, as Ron suggested, might be, if we needed to send somebody out, they'd be the right people.
Yep. That ties into the purpose definition, which again seems fitting. Don't recommend any tweaks, but yeah, and any new construction or a building permit's issued for an alteration or something like that, and the contractor is requesting that an alternative method that meets code or fits the interpretation of code needs to be done because of whatever circumstance exists, that's where this code appeals board would review that and make a decision on whether they can move forward with that construction method or an alternative, or deny the alternative that they're proposing. Any question about code appeals board?
So we're not going to require bylaws, we're just gonna let that go?
No, I just wanted to note that they do not have bylaws, and they
Right.
will be getting bylaws.
Okay, you'll be prepared, you are preparing them, okay, thanks.
So the Housing Appeals Board is a little bit more wacky too, because they're in Chapter 8. If you went to our Code of Ordinances right now and you search Housing Appeals Board, nothing would show up at all. There's one section within our International Property Maintenance Code that defines an appeals board and has some sections on the members, the term limits, and that's about it. And that's all within our every 3 years. This is something that our Housing Appeals Board also makes recommendations on, is every 3 years when we update the International Property Code and our code to match that. So within all those sections, there's one section related to that we adopt the International Property Maintenance Code, that there's an appeals board, and that's pretty much it. So again, we would recommend, whether it's within Chapter 8 or within Chapter 2 that lists a lot of our boards, calling out that this board is created and not hiding it within a bunch of other information related to our property maintenance code. This one's a little bit different though. 5 members just need to be, there's some odd language here, residents and electors of the city. I'd recommend we probably just match the policy manual resolution saying that they would need to reside in city limits and or own property or a business within city limits.
Not say they have to be registered to vote? Electors?
Yeah. That's an interesting one. I hadn't seen that one.
We're gonna edit that out, yeah.
Our senior code and zoning officer, Rick Berry, serves as the staff liaison, is also called out as the ex officio in there. Again, they meet as needed, and then they do have maybe some more frequent meetings every 3 years when we're updating the International Property Maintenance Code. They too have been meeting on site, and we would propose eliminating that as well. And they do not have bylaws, and we would look to adopt some new bylaws there that match your policy manual resolution. So this is, again, this is that one section in Chapter 8 within the International Property Maintenance Code portion that kind of defines what they do, and it says that this body hears appeals pursuant to another section related to how people can apply for appeals, and then they can provide variances related to another section, which is the procedure for variances. So not a great defined purpose, the one on our website probably is more fitting that we would put within the ordinance that we adopt, and some further language as it relates to the International Property Maintenance Code.
Is that quasi judicial too?
They are. Yep. Yep. So this would be in the event that a code or zoning complaint occurs. Rick Berry and his staff, are either made aware of it somehow and investigate, and they determine that this property isn't up to code. You need to make it up to code. That homeowner would be coming to this Housing Appeals Board to say, I get it, but I want a variance because of whatever that is. It could be, this is a hypothetical example that's probably wrong, but you have a stairway to a basement that was built in the 40s that doesn't have a handrail. So they say you need to add a handrail, but they're like, well, if I add a handrail, then I only got like a 20-inch stairway, and then it's harder to get down. So, and they're trying to appeal that. So on those case-by-case basis, again, they 3 to 5 meetings, appeals a year. So these last two will probably have some significant ordinance overhauls that you'll see, but really not intending to make any drastic changes to it, more so better codify the Housing Appeals Board and the Code Appeals Board.
All right, any other questions for Jared? All right, why don't you have a seat, and we'll see if we got some public comment on any of these last 3 boards here.
We did have one individual sign up. Kirk, is that you?
Hi, good evening.
Speak.
Kirk Crabtree, 322 15th Street in Ogden. Specifically going back to the Airport Advisory Board, as was briefed very well here, there are 11 members, 6 of them are at large, and then you had the 5 that were recommended by the mayor of JC, the chamber, Pot County, Fort Riley, and K-State. What I would ask, my comment and my ask to you all, is to perhaps consider having or adding someone from the city of Ogden. This is a regional airport. Going back to some comments that were made of, well, they don't pay in, so they shouldn't have representation. I don't know if I'm allowed to comment on that. So I'll let that one drop. However, with both what we in Ogden are trying to do with our community and economic development, the airport does play a significant part, just like the airport. This regional airport plays a significant part in a lot of the region. Having a citizen from Ogden on that board to be able to come back to Ogden and say, here's what's going on, and also being able to have the voice of the people of Ogden, just like it has the voice of K-State, Fort Riley, Junction City, Pot County, and the chamber. So that's my ask, that's my comment, is that you look at and perhaps think about having a dedicated seat, just like the other 5, and adding someone from the city of Ogden. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure about a dedicated seat, but there's no reason somebody from Ogden couldn't apply and for one of the at-large seats, and I think we're gonna have a couple openings. Well, people coming up for renewals this summer, I think, that are at-large. So if you have somebody in mind, you could ask them to fill out an application for the board, and they could sure be considered, and I don't know about the dedicated part, but.
Well, to answer that,
Yes.
may I answer that, please, Mark, is, absolutely. I mean, just like anyone else can apply for any board, and just like any of the recommendations from the other 5 entities, of course, still have to come before y'all. Yeah. Y'all do have the final say, and the mayor has the final say on who sits on it. However, once again, the city, this airport may be in Manhattan's backyard, it's in Ogden's front yard. All right, it is a large part of what we do. When troops deploy from Fort Riley to leave out of the airport, they don't go through downtown Manhattan, they go through downtown Ogden. All right, so what I'm saying is, yes, absolutely, somebody could apply just like anyone else, but having that dedicated recommendation would carry more weight and would just show that, yes, this is regional. We have everyone in the region that has a voice.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll consider it.
And Mayor, there needs to be something to carry on through history. So some of these boards were, these guidelines that as mayor last year, that I looked to, oh, I can't appoint someone out of town to this, it has to be a resident, or I need to look for, so we may have an understanding today, but we need to put it in some kind of reference for future mayors that appointing someone from Ogden is acceptable. And there may not always be someone from Ogden that wants to serve too. It's a smaller size community, but certainly I could support in some way working that into our guidelines for the mayors of the future.
Oh, yes. I guess there's no other opportunity for anybody else to comment, so we'll close public comment. And that will, any other discussion about any of these work session items? All right, if not, we'll move on to the city manager briefing.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. Good evening. Got several things to kind of run through this evening, in addition to the planning chart. So first off, City Clerk Brenda Wolf wanted me to remind you that if you need to update your substantial interest forms are due by Friday, April 28th. So if you would please provide that or communicate that you don't have any changes, that would be helpful. And then one of the, there again, just kind of look at some upcoming meetings that we have. There's a League of Kansas Municipalities Municipal Training Institute on May 5th, and registration deadline is also the 28th. If anybody's interested in attending that, we've got Mark and Wynn are planning to attend the Established Business Leaders Luncheon at Midwest Dream Car on tomorrow. It is tomorrow, yes. So it may be too late to register for that. There's an MRC luncheon on the 3rd that Mark and John have indicated they will be attending. And then if we have a joint city-county-county meeting to talk about animal control officers or something like that, it would be here on May 18th or whatever other subject matter that you may want. And then there's no intergovernmental meeting in May. We also have the parking garage open house is May 4th, and that's from 9 a.m. to 1. And then there's a dedication to the new streetscape and opening. Actually, we're going to open North Manhattan before then. I think it's going to maybe be open by the end of the week. They're progressing really well, so we're not going to delay not opening up to traffic just for the ceremony. We'll close it down for the ceremony, but it'll be under the Welcome to Aggieville Arch at 10:30 on Thursday, May 4th. So if you'd like to, I think Chelsea sent a calendar invite out for that as well. So if you could respond to that.
Yeah, she sent an invite out about the garage open house and wanted to know if we were going to be there. There's not really an event. There's not a specific timeline of.
Correct.
They've
I
already.
think they just wanted to give you the notice.
Yeah, okay.
There will be a booth. They're going to kind of block off the parking right by the entrance and help people sign up for the app and stuff like that. So, in theory, you could all show up and talk to Adrian or something like that at the same time. So we might, if you're all going to be at the ribbon cutting, we'll probably notice both.
Okay.
Just some things I've had in your mail folders. Last Monday, there was a memo on the Brownfield study and incorporating that within the Beyond Tomorrow Downtown Plan, which you're going to get an update on here at an upcoming work session. But this will be similar to the Brownfield study that was done in conjunction with the West Anderson review. The Flint Hills Regional Council has received a grant from the EPA and hired that same Santec, the same consultant. Again, this would be on a voluntary basis only with participating businesses, and so it would just be I think, a good assistance to that Beyond Tomorrow study to analyze those opportunities that may exist. So again, you might be thinking about that. They would like to gear up and know that might be part of their workload. if that was to come about. So any concerns with that for this study? Okay.
I'm enthusiastic about it. I think the Flint Hills Regional Council is focusing those grants on the community, the needs of the respective communities, large and small. There are some small cities and counties that are involved in this too. So I'm glad that Manhattan is the beneficiary of one of the projects.
I think it was in last night's mail folder, we had a memo from Stephanie. We've been keeping Stephanie busy writing memos on the kind of the next steps with housing. We had a really good, Stephanie and John were at the intergovernmental meeting yesterday and gave a good update, focusing primarily on the RHID, the Rural Housing Incentive Districts, and I know at least was invited by the school district to come present to their full board, so I think that was good, a lot of information. But since our work session, where you all we need to move forward on this, two different times last week, we got updates from the state. If you read that memo, it really is going to make it virtually impossible for us to meet that June timeline for anybody to ask us to put in an application. That we've learned that actually you have to have a pre-app in by May 12th. You now only have to have one developer. You can't have multiple developer unless they're working together on the same project. The ones that we're aware of would require rezoning. There's not time to do that in that thing. So Stephanie did a nice job of laying out kind of the next steps for us as we would kind of target that November timeline to work forward with that. So I just wanted to see if there were any questions about that or concerns about that aspect of it.
No, I heard good things about the housing summit, though.
Yes.
From a couple of people who were
Since we've done that, we kind of expanded our typical CDBG housing education program and talked more about housing. So, yeah. Very well attended.
The city changed the format some,
We did.
and I think it invited more participation rather than just kind of being talked to. But it really caused a dynamic conversation in several of the sessions that was very valuable for everybody.
Today, actually last Friday in my Friday update, I gave you a notion that we've been contacted and awarded a $1.5 million base grant, which is exciting for the Garage Entrepreneurship and Innovation Hub. So we're excited about that. I provided just late today an update on that gives you a little bit more background on that.
I want more, yeah.
And so that was provided email today, and so we'll be bringing that forward. Obviously, we're working with the Chamber of Commerce, and it had that study that they invested in that really created that concept through Region Reimagine, and then they did the update. I attached that to that email that I sent in the memo. And then we're working with KSU IP for their aspect of facilitating, and likely would be the leaseholder in that area. We had applied for actually more than we got, but what we have will work. It does require a $500,000 match, and there's several options for us, but we think using some of the $800,000 we got for the sale of the parking lot to the Marriott would be a good fit for that. And so it's a matter of how much can we incorporate. Ideally, I think at least the Manhattan Avenue side, there's 3 suites there at that level. Originally in that phase 1 project, we went to the around the corner to incorporate some of that as well. So more to come to you all. Eventually we'll be in front of you with some proposals and some of those opportunities as well.
So we would be charging rent?
Yes.
Okay, we won't be giving the space away?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I think they are interested in a long-term lease.
Yeah,
So,
good.
For that space. Today, some of us were on a call with our bond counsel and folks from the Manhattan Housing Authority on Sunflower Flats. you might have read, although it hasn't got a lot of coverage, because last week the governor announced that they were recipients of a $1.5 million ARPA award. So specifically to help with that particular project, they're working hard to get their application in for the 9% tax credits. I think it's due maybe by the end of next week or sometime next week, and so they're focused on that. The purpose of this call was to really look at are there other programs or projects? So the one that had come to mind and is being utilized in other Kansas cities, and specifically one of the co-developers is working in Gardner, I believe, with them on a similar type proposal for senior housing and incorporating IRBs as part of that. So the IRBs benefit from industrial revenue bonds because you can get the sales tax exemption for construction materials, and could even get the property tax exemption as a possibility, which you still might be able to get some kind of pilot even with that. So those are just some components that we're not promising anything or anything else. It was just more of a discovery and would it fit and does it need to? But I think there was some interest in certainly keeping their options open for that. And obviously, if they're successful, that all comes back to the city in a formal application. We have a pre-development agreement with them right now on that arrangement. So more to come, and hopefully they'll be successful.
So when you say is this the one on Houston?
Yes.
That lot, so they got the 1.2?
Well, it's on Pierre.
What they were applying for was the tax credits.
So
the
this was just,
conjunction
as I
with-
understand it, what they applied for was an extra grant, that some of the items that the 9% tax credit wouldn't cover. So could be some of the soft costs, for example.
And the expenditure on the building was going to be close to $10 to $12 million though, right?
Yeah, at least, I think it's
13
probably more
13
than.
million.
But I think they're still playing with that 13.
Right.
Okay, and then, since John's on there, also looking for probably investors, or is there other grant funding for that?
Or don't, where are they getting most of that 13 million?
Yeah.
Is that
Well,
from the
Well,
feds?
they'll get it through marketing the tax credits.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's private, but I mean,
Yeah.
like how they go out and
Private,
money, but you're getting the tax credit, which is the incentive for them to come in and do
Right.
the project.
so the 1.5 million or 2 million is still on hold till the rest of it is coming in, or?
No, my understanding has been awarded. Now, I don't know
I don't
what
know
all the
either.
strings are with that grant. We're not involved in that grant. That's
Okay.
all MHA,
Okay,
so
and that area is being called Sunflower Flats?
that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted
Doesn't
to,
have to be called that forever. Just
right,
for a
but when they say that, and when they say the 1.2 million, I was wondering, is this what they mean? Is this what it's going for? So this
Right.
is what it's going for, okay.
It is for the parking lot project. And when I first heard it too, I wondered if it was the other.
Oh, it's our
The other
side.
side. Yeah, it's the parking lot project.
Right,
That's the ballroom.
yeah, the bottom.
The other item I wanted to, so this is kind of, let's see if I got, coming up then on planning charts. One of the things that's somewhat agenda related that we've kind of targeted, I'm going to skip ahead to the May 16th meeting. We had in your mail folder was a draft request for proposal for the US 24 Gateway Comprehensive Plan update. So Stephanie and her staff provided a draft of that document, and that was something we kind of talked about at your goal-setting session in January, of really taking a hard focus and really need to update that comprehensive plan as we look at Scorpion's impact and the annexation that we've done in that particular area, and really looking at all of the service components related to land use, related to utilities, all of that. So
How does this fit? You also mentioned that you had talked with the Potawatomi County Commission about
Corridor
working collaboratively to develop a corridor plan, to work about that whole area.
That's two different things.
it is two different
Two
things.
different-
Actually, I've since told them that, that we're planning to bring this to you all, and
Yeah.
if you concur, that we would proceed with that, and it will do more than what we would look at, doing everything the corridor update would do for that area
Yeah.
and more.
Uh-huh.
So, the corridor plan would actually extend all the way to Wamego, and this plan
Only goes,
only goes to Hopkins Creek Road, I
Right,
think.
yeah.
And so,
past,
so I had a meeting with Chad Kingsley, the city administrator, or county administrator for Potawatomi County, and told him that we were looking at this. I gave him a copy of that draft as well. And I think he's shared that information with
Okay.
the county commissioners this past Monday, yesterday.
won't be a surprise. I mean,
So, and we would typically have a technical committee and a steering committee that
Right.
we would want. I've told them we'd want both their staff on that technical committee. We'd want the county commissioners to either participate or designate someone to sit on the steering committee, as well as other folks in that particular area.
but we're not asking them to join us in that or to share in any of the cost.
We're not.
We need to move forward.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So, I'm gonna jump back up now to May 2nd next week. We've got the rezoning down on 407 Potawatomi. That was a tie vote at the planning board meeting. So it was, that results in a recommending against the rezoning. So if the commission wants to, the staff had recommended approval of the rezoning request. So if you want to approve that, it will take a 2/3 majority to override the planning board. You could uphold the planning board's rejection, or you can send it back to the planning board. So those are
And that would be May 2nd?
that'll be May 2nd.
Okay.
So 2/3 is 4.
Yes.
Okay. Supermajority.
Yeah, and I think the planning board voted with 3-3, somebody was
3-3.
missing, so.
Yeah. The other item, there's an amendment to the PUD, or the Plan Unit Development, out on McCall Landing for a new Culver's Restaurant. That would be just between Wagyu and the credit union. There's an undeveloped tract out there.
What is the other piece that's being developed? It's got a big fence around it? Oh, smooth, okay, thank you. I think we approved that a while back, and I just lost the thought of, okay, thanks.
And then there's a couple of municipal facility reviews. One's for the school district on the Bluemont Elementary School parking lot. That did get approval from the planning board. I think it was 4-2. And then there's another municipal facility review for the county health department digital sign amendment, and that was approved by the planning board. So those are the 4 general agenda items. There's a public hearing to vacate a utility easement that's similar to other ones we've had. Nobody's using it, so they want to be able to do some expansion in that particular area. I think in this case, it's another swimming pool. We do have a recognition that night I'd like you to consider, and that would be Fort Riley. I think the work session that we had last meeting was when they held their ceremony, and we're recognizing, I think we're 36 years membership in the AUSA Fort Riley chapter, and they'd like to come and present a plaque to us. So I thought that was appropriate. Quite a few second readings of ordinances on there. We do anticipate an award for the Blue River Channel Vegetation Management of that. This is the old Blue River Channel along to the east side of Tuttle Creek Boulevard between US 24 and McCall, and having maintenance contract for that particular area. And then we also have a award of our 2023 asphalt maintenance phase 1 with Schilling. We have a final plat of the KSU Edition Unit 3, which is where the building construction is occurring now, and there's also a development agreement for that a little bit further down for some utility relocation work that they're planning to do and install. And then we also have some emergency shelter grants, which is typical for extra funding that comes in from the state and for some of the public services that are eligible for those. And let's see, where else we got? The CDBG Consolidated Annual Plan that we ask you to approve. And I think those are the highlights for the second. Continuing on the 16th then, there's general agenda items for zoning of the MCM Landing Business Park. They're on the west end of the airport. We've already annexed, so this would be the zoning for that. We've got an amendment to the Chapter 2 regulating public records for you to consider that evening.
Time out.
Yep.
Time out. So it's out of the, go back up to the rezoning, it's out of the Urban Area Planning Board purview, which means that nobody else weighs in on it except us?
I'll let Stephanie talk about that.
Darn it, she was almost out the door.
That's okay. So it's been annexed, so now it is within the planning board's jurisdiction. The annexation just couldn't go before the planning board because it was outside of that boundary. So now that it's actually been annexed into the city, the planning board will make a recommendation on the zoning.
Okay, so only the
So the
annex-
comment doesn't apply anymore.
Okay, scratch that out. Okay, all right, got it. Thank you. Go home.
We also, hopefully, we've moved this several times, and we're still waiting on some easements and some agreements. This is for the alley improvements between Good Sense and behind Rally House, going from the Rally Alley out to Little Moro. So several actions there related to that particular project. We anticipate bringing back the formal request from MATC for funding and some options for you there. And then we also plan to have that night the agreement with the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce for their first $250,000 for the Elevate revolving loan fund to benefit the entrepreneurial activities that you had heard about and gave some direction on. And that agreement would be with the Chamber of Commerce as part of the discussion that was had that night. And up on the consent, got some hydrant and valve replacement work, pretty standard. We do have an agreement for some donor-initiated public art at the Flint Hills Discovery Center. This is for a bison sculpture that they've been working on for quite some time, so I think they've selected an artist and are ready to make a recommendation on that. We've got some upgrades at our wastewater treatment plant, and then ratification of our temporary note sale, as well as requests from the vendor that we're contracting with for the Arts in the Parks production series. Wants to be able to have the sale and service of alcohol for the Arts in the Park venue, and so they'll be making that request to you as well for that consideration. We would also anticipate that evening that Commissioner Reddy has indicated, as you've seen, that she supplied you with, that she plans to have the May 2nd be her last meeting. And so with that vacancy, we would have a resolution to add the vacant commissioner position to the November ballot. So we'd have 4 versus 3. And then it'd be appropriate to elect a new mayor pro tem and divvy up the assignments that she currently has on committees, which are the CVB, as well as ATA and the MPO, right? Okay. So you can be thinking about those. I think that's enough. Any questions that you might have?
Work session.
There are work sessions coming up. So on the 9th of May, we're looking at having that be on tomorrow. Downtown plan update, some of the work that staff and steering committee have been working on, so I wanted to provide that update. And then continued work with some of the boards on reviews, and this would be the Municipal Audit Committee and the Aggieville and Downtown Business Improvement District boards. Then on the 23rd of May, pavement management system update, as well as the cemetery master plan, preliminary plan review. Again, we're not planning to have a meeting on May 30th, the fifth Tuesday. And then in June starts the budget work sessions. I can certainly ask Director Pete if you'd like to do that. I can.
Wait, he's got stuff to do, I suspect.
He's pretty busy.
Yeah, so that's.
Well, I think he's returning from, his brother was gravely ill, and so I think he's returning today, actually was back at work. That's what I heard yesterday.
Yeah, I saw him this morning.
So.
He's back.
All right, what else, items that you need to pass on to the good of the commission here?
I've got 4 things on my list. One, you can send us a memo, Ron, you know, K-Man and a bunch of guys on social media are just putting out all kinds of stuff on the mailbox that got hit by the snowplow 2 years ago.
Or not?
Or not. And I guess the bottom line is they're saying, okay, the city's wasted, I think K-Man got a Freedom of Information Act thing, and they added some stuff up, and they said, we spent $50,000 on a $2,300 mailbox. And I'm not sure that they got their facts right. So, you know, when people ask me questions, I just haven't replied. Because for all I know, he got records of the insurance premiums we've been paying that company. So it'd be interesting to just, you know, have the details. That, you know, did the insurance company take them to court because they didn't want to pay? And, you know, how much did the city really pay in tax dollars?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
We provided some of that information, and yeah, it really wasn't, it was about the mailbox, but it wasn't really much about the mailbox. It was the attorney fees that were awarded, which isn't typically something that happens in cases like this, and the insurance company wanted to challenge that. So the insurance company has paid the bulk of those fees.
Yeah, we didn't, the insurance company.
Right.
That's what my assumption was. Is there some way you can write that out so that I can reply to these people and say, look, quit? Because I hate it when things just go, you know, completely down the rabbit hole without the actual facts.
Sure.
And it just, then it gets a momentum of its own, you know.
Right.
And then I sent you the note today I got from the lady worried about the water billing system, and I think I gave her the information on how to do the auto payment so she doesn't have to. But the concern was, you know, getting a letter, you know, that I'm gonna cut your water off. I think she had a good point there. We may wanna relook.
So it was a little inaccurate, and I did
Okay.
forward that to some of my folks, and actually Susie, right before this meeting, sent me a really good reply that speaks to how that process was. So, I mean, it's really a whole nother month before they're on a shut-off list. They may get a notice that they're gonna be put on a shut-off list, but they're actually have a whole, almost another 30 days.
I didn't think she did it that quick from my experience, and
right.
that's what I told the lady I
So
said.
it's, and she couldn't find, we had the name that you provided, but we couldn't find her on any account. So I said there must be another household name that it's on.
Yeah. But anyway, I think that one got resolved. And then, we're working on that RCPD budget, of course, the law board is, and I'm still interested in that co-responder contract. Can we get that resolved so that we decide we're gonna use that money from the special alcohol board to fund the co-responders?
So is that something you want the commission to make a decision on
Well, I think
relative to?
I think we have to, right? The
To
commission's
give
gonna have
that
to vote on it.
direction to the law board that you'd like to have those funds be utilized like they were originally, I suppose, or at least for.
Yeah,
one of the
that's what we
positions?
actually told them we're working on.
We've talked to
But
them
we
about
need to
it.
get a decision here so that can get worked into their budget.
I'd like to have, you send us the statute and the state regulation about how the special alcohol funds have to be spent. I think they're prevention.
I mean, they've been spent for this before.
Co-responders are after the fact, so I just want to see the statute.
We funded it that way before, but if we could just put that on the agenda.
So is there a majority of commissioners that want to see that on the agenda? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
And is that something that needs to go through the board, or that doesn't need to go through the advisory board, or that
There
just
isn't an
deducted?
advisory
There isn't
board.
an advisory board right now.
Yeah, but they're setting up one.
We did away with it.
as you recall, we're going to be delaying that process moving forward later in the budget process. So you all will be giving that board basically an allocation of funds. So you're going to set the amount from what you have normally given from SSAB and what you would have normally given from special alcohol. So you'll set that number, and then that board will move forward with accepting applications and making recommendations on allotments. So in this case, you would be giving the new Community Support Funds Advisory Group less special alcohol funds if you're going down this route.
So we just take it out before they get it.
Right.
To divvy up the rest of it, if we did that.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyway, I just would like to resolve that. And then the last thing, after that wonderful meeting with the county on the animal control officers, I'm of the opinion that what we should do is just push the county into having a contract with the shelter and just scrap the idea of trying to put the ACOs over there in RCPD, because I have never seen so much resistance to change. I mean, the county commissioners, lined up as a group, and RCPD does not appear to be happy, at least the management. And I'd hate to see our animal control officers be moved into that kind of an environment, because it's not going to be a fun place to work.
It's unfortunate because we don't really know. The people that work with them seem to get along okay. There's just particularly one person who doesn't like the idea.
Yeah, but I think it's just sort of a waste of time for staff and everybody.
I didn't want to say it that night, but I think so too.
So I do think that, if we accomplish anything, we certainly reiterated a need for an agreement. For both of them, actually. We need one with RCPD if they want us to respond and assist them in their functions, which we're not authorized to do in a lot of those cases. We need an agreement with them, and we also need an agreement with the county if that's what they want us to do. If they want us to continue to have folks from the county to be able to bring an animal to the shelter, which all the other entities, Potawatomi County and all the small cities, have their employee bring it, so then they pay that cost. But if Riley County wants us to have a citizen of Riley County bring it in, then they know that how are we gonna document that, so they pay the bill, so, or not, and but needing agreements is something I've been preaching for the last several years to them, to be able to cover us for us acting on their behalf, because as a city employee, they don't have that authority.
Well, I think we need to keep doing that. If not, then we just don't. I mean, to me, we've got their attention. We should just make sure we get the agreement. They've created such an issue out of it. It's like, well, you create the issue, you need to come to agreement, or, forget, hate to do it, but forget about it.
And we are working on, I do think, in my discussions with Director Pete, he certainly has observed and had animal control under his supervision before in a police department. So I think there's just a lot of other issues, and whether or not it could work just for the city or the county, there's obviously some issues there that are hard to get past from that perspective.
So, yeah, I think, RCPD, I don't see a problem with getting an agreement with them, and then the county, well, staffs can try to work that out, but hopefully, and then maybe we can revisit this in a couple of years, when the climate's a little bit different.
We do plan to bring forward the RFP for shelter services, though.
Still want to do that. I still think that's an excellent plan, the shelter services, and we may have to pull the ACOs.
And we're
out
having
of
that discussion internally about where that makes sense and whether or not we want to force that or not. It's optional, whether they're willing. Again, they have a relationship with that group more so than anybody else, than if they're with Adrian and Parking Services or the fire department, or, there's reasons that you might keep them involved in that function and house them there because of that interaction.
I'm just for, let's do what we can actually maybe accomplish, but I just see this ACO in RCPD as a mission impossible at this point, so I'm just not going to support it on the law board either.
All right, thanks for that feedback.
I would like for the staff to work with Riley County and talk about, instead of the two boards just firing missiles in public meetings, I want the staff to work on this and see if we can't get them to agreement.
And we had been, and I was approached by staff after that meeting that says, we need to work on an agreement.
I mean, that's what
Yeah.
we've done in the past.
We need to be working on an
Typically, the
agreement.
staffs work things out, and so, if we don't, I mean, if it's only 6 or 9 animals a year, as they say, we don't know. I don't have enough information to even talk about it.
I just,
Nobody gives it to me.
I just
I
want
gave you a copy of what I sent them last Friday.
know, but
It's
I-
60 visits a year, the last 2 years, and we just canceled that stuff in January. So I did provide that
Yeah.
information.
Okay.
I just want to add a few comments about the corresponders and the special alcohol funds. I had a conversation with Robin Cole, who is part of the entire process, and because the contract is through Pawnee, and the idea of soft money being allocated to these very important positions. And then the idea of, if we already allocate those funds, I'm thinking 180,000, right? For 2 of them.
183.
Yeah, 183 out of that, and that reduces that amount. To be cautious about even USD 383, their social workers are not completely funded with the special alcohol funds. Only their training for alcohol and addiction prevention is funded through that. So I want to make sure we are not also taking out some preventive measures, which we're not just dealing with crisis, but we're also dealing with the prevention part of it. And just to make sure those conversations are happening, because I think it's a very short-term solution when it was, that's why we put it in the RCPD budget to make sure that it stays in there, because we don't know how these funds are going to continue to go. And then the other agencies that need those same funds won't be having resources towards the same addiction issues. And what we see not only in the city of Manhattan, but throughout many communities, is addiction is an issue, whether it's with drugs or it's with alcohol, and not enough resources. So I want to make sure we are not already having a dedicated funding source for 2 positions, which were also part of the RCPD budget as a solution, because then you're just playing the shell game and somebody else is losing out on those resources.
Ron, I think you're meeting with some reps from the Trust for the Zoo and sometime here soon, and I was at their meeting the other night. Now, there's some frustration there that they're not getting an answer because, they want to work on this new project. They're not asking for money from the city, but they need to get like an architect and stuff, and you need to move in order to keep the fundraising going and all of that. So I'm just hoping we can give them some real answers on that.
Yeah, we've got a meeting set up with them. If it's not this week, it's next week. And I've got resources there to be able to answer that. And obviously, we worked effectively, I think, with Asia, but at the same time, I think they're maybe wanting to maybe not do exactly what we did with Asia, and so that's just whatever agreement we ultimately bring to you all, we want to make sure it's in line with our policies and your policies.
Right, yeah. I think the main is they want to get going with an architect so they can really know what it's going to be in total.
One more thing is, well, maybe a couple of things. I had a phone call from one of the business owners in Aggieville, and he wanted to provide, kind of like how K-State provides you a little parking tag as a guest. If you come in, they take care of your parking fees. And he wanted to do something similar, but he was told that he would have to gather everybody's license plates and send all of those in and such. Is that necessary? Can he just buy the allotment of however much he was going to use for these, for his guests' parking fees? Because he was going to have a bunch of teachers there, and he was hoping he can just give them a card or some kind of a little voucher thing that they could just use to tap out, as opposed to getting all of their license information and everything else just so they can utilize it.
Is there a parking validation option with this?
Is this for a one-time event?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be difficult. I'll talk with Adrian about it. We have the ability for someone to reserve a stall
Yeah,
for,
Yeah, he's doing a professional development for
But-
20 teachers, and he wanted to pay for their parking so that they can take care of, the professional development. But he was told that he has to get all of their license plates and everything, all of that information. If he was gonna pay for it, it wasn't an issue of paying. So at K-State, when I go and they wanna, give me a little thing to take care of my parking fees.
That's the difference between a card swipe and an app swipe.
Yeah,
K-State has a thing.
so but we can't do anything like that.
K-State will be moving away from that as well, though.
But they still have a QR code reader that should be able to get a validated potential voucher that.
No, you're paying for the parking up front when you get there. So before you do anything, you're registering your vehicle and picking how long you want to park. The K-State method is you're grabbing a ticket and you're paying when you leave, which they are moving away from that. They're moving the arms and doing license plate recognition as well. So I'm not sure how they'll validate parking, but
So right now, you're saying they can't do it? We can't do it?
right now, we don't have a system like that developed, so it'd have to be something that we're gonna have to look with either Park Mobile or IPS, who does the pay stations, on how they would do that.
So each of them has to do the app?
Either way, though, if they're gonna validate parking, the individual is still going to have to register some way that their vehicle is there and put their license plate in, whether it's through the pay station or whether it's through the app. We'd have to talk with Adrian on how you could validate that up front. There might be a possibility, though.
Because
I'm not sure.
yeah.
It's short of getting their license plate number, and you could punch that into the system and compare those with the ones that have come into the thing. So there's nothing short of getting the license plate.
You have to get
Yeah.
the app, is
The-
what you're
Yeah,
saying.
or at least.
Or the only thing, I don't know if this is possible, but the only thing I think you might be able to do is if you set up something in those pay stations where an individual has some type of code or something that is provided by parking services to that company, and then they're providing it to the individuals, but they're still going to have to go up to that pay station and register, my vehicle's here, this is how long I'm parking, here's my license plate. And then maybe there's an ability for them to type in some code and get a validated parking that's been prepaid for, but I don't know. I'm not sure. So it'd have to be something that we'd work with IPS probably to design, not necessarily Park Mobile, the app.
Because they're trying to do friendly business, and it
Yeah.
feels like it gets in the way of all of that. It's so easy. I mean, I kind of like, it may sound prehistoric, but I do kind of like the card system instead of the app system, because it really, one, I don't like people capturing everybody's license plate numbers for no good reason, and he's trying to be a friendly gesture, and we're just kind of making it a little bit more difficult, each of these situations. So, you said they still have to go in, whether they get the app or not. There is a way for him to take care of no, there isn't, okay.
No,
Payment cash.
I don't know what's possible. All I'm trying to say is that someone can't just pull in. This is what happens at K-State. They pull into the garage, they grab their ticket, and then they go to their meeting, and someone gives them a little piece of paper with a QR code, and then they leave and they scan that, and they don't have to pay. Our system is completely different from that, whereas you always, unless you have a permit, you always have to either go to a pay station immediately or go to Park Mobile immediately and register your license plate that you are there. So if you're going to require, or if you're going to create some type of validation process, it's going to have to follow that method, as opposed to what you're suggesting, which is someone gets a piece of paper or a validation card. That's not how our system and enforcement works. So we'll have to work with Adrian on if you can create some type of validation process, how that would look and how that would meet our system.
I was
That's
just
all I'm
thinking
saying.
if.
I don't know the answer, though.
Yeah, I was thinking when you drive in, it captures your license plates, and you got 15 minutes before it sends a message. So if Adrian had a list of the 15 or 20 people's license plates that are affiliated with the organization, when the thing flips up in 15 minutes and says, oh, you didn't register, it's like, are they on the list? Yes. Okay, and then you can sort of start tracking, and when that car leaves, then you could see how long they were there and send the guy a bill. Total pain in the butt, I agree.
No,
but-
that is the alternative.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He was
said
given.
He has to get, he has to
But
get
they
all
have to
of
get the
their-
license
They
plate.
do
He
have
has
to
to
get
get all
that.
the, I just think it's kind of, I don't know, intrusive all the time getting license plates. I don't know. I will let him know that was the only way to do it, but it just, in this age of technology where everybody grabs everybody's data all of the time, it just doesn't make I don't know, good business, but I guess that's business these days.
See, if I was a business owner, I'd just simply give them $2. I mean, I don't know how hard that
That's
is.
probably what he's gonna do.
They could show me the phone and say, okay, it's gonna cost you $2 to park, or take $2 off their bill. I mean, that's the easy way to do it. I mean, making this way too complicated in my mind.
I think they were gonna be there for like, I don't know, 4 or 5, 6 hours.
Yeah. 4 or 5 bucks. Okay, anybody else got anything else we need to know about?
I'd just like to call attention to the Manhattan Public Library is having their annual book sale this coming weekend. If you're a friend of the public library, you can go in on Friday evening and have a much better choice, but they won't be gone. They'll still be available on Saturday and Sunday. And the city is cooperating with them, and the sale is at the
Pavilion.
Pavilion
Default
in
Pavilion.
City Park. Right. I was searching for that one word. the
If you've got your Manhattan Library Association card.
Yep.
You can come Friday night. Yep, and get a head start. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. Please call the roll.
Mr. Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Motta,
Yes.
Commissioner Morse.
Yes.
Mayor Hattasol.
Yes,
Commissioner Reddy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
meeting adjourned.